This episode is brought to you by Thorn, and I have some incredible news for any of you that are in the military, first responder, or medical professions. In an effort to give back, Thorn is now offering you an ongoing 25% off each and every one of your purchases of their incredible nutritional solutions. Now, Thorn is the official supplement of CrossFit, the UFC, the Mayo Clinic, the Human Performance Project, and multiple special operations organizations. I myself have used them for several years, and that is why I brought them on as a sponsor. Some of my favorite products they have are their Multivitamin Elite, their Whey Protein, the Super EPA, and then most recently, Cinequil. As a firefighter, a stuntman, and a martial artist, I've had my share of brain trauma and sleep deprivation, and Cinequil is their latest brain health supplement. Now, to qualify for the 35% off, go to thorn.com, thorne.com. Click on sign in and then create a new account. You will see the opportunity to register as a first responder or member of military. When you click on that, it will take you through verification with GovX. You'll simply choose a profession, provide one piece of documentation, and then you are verified for life. From that point onwards, you will continue to receive 35% off through Thorn. Now, for those of you who don't qualify, there is still the 10% off using the code BTS10, Behind the Shield 10, for a one-time purchase. Now, to learn more about Thorn, go to episode 323 of the Behind the Shield podcast with Joel Totoro and Wes Barnett. This episode is sponsored by Team Builder, yet another company that's doing great things for the first responder community. As a strength and conditioning coach myself who also trains tactical athletes, dissemination of wellness information is one of the biggest challenges. Now, Team Builder is the premier strength and conditioning software for tactical athletes, and there are several features that really impress me. Firstly, there is a full exercise library, so you, the personal trainer, does not have to create that within your own department. Secondly, you can send out programming, but also individualize, which I love. So you blanket program for everyone. Now you can tweak based on someone's injury, someone's need to maybe drop some body composition, rather than having to write a program for every single person on their own. Team Builder also allows you to build custom questionnaires to collate health and wellness data. It integrates with wearables. And I think one of the most important things is obviously it tracks. To me, it's imperative that we as a profession start tracking our people from day one and then over the full span of their career, therefore catching potential wellness issues and injuries before they happen. Now, if you want to try Team Builder, they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, a free 14-day trial to experience all of the features. And if you want to take a deeper dive into Team Builder, listen to episode 1032 with Melissa Mercado, or go to teambuilder.com. And I'll spell that to you because it's not as you'd think, TEAMBUILDR.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show veteran firefighter paramedic Marc Maikoski. Now, what makes this interview extremely powerful is Marc and I have been friends for a few years, so this interview is a long time coming. We ended up doing an episode together, and he was still working through some things, so we actually waited till he went through the SIREN Project and circled round again and redid the episode, and it is so much more powerful. So we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the fire service, firefighter fitness, CrossFit, yoga for first responders, his powerful mental health story, the Shatterproof program, healing through plant medicine, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredibly powerful and important conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of almost 1,100 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. And one side note, I was sick as a dog when we did this conversation, so you may hear some coughing in the background. I apologize for that. So with that being said, I introduce to you Marc Maikoski. Enjoy.
All right. Well, Marc, I want to start by saying, firstly, thank you for driving all the way to Ocala, Florida to come to my home. And secondly, for people listening, we did a conversation a few months ago virtually.
Yes, we did.
And a lot has changed since then. So now we're doing it face to face. We've scratched the first one because there's going to be so much, value to this, especially when it comes to post-traumatic growth. So with that preamble out the way, I want to welcome you to my home today.
Thanks, James. This is the second time I've been able to be in your home. And that's one of the things I value most is the power of connectivity and to share space with you physically versus over a screen. Means the world to me. I remember last time you welcomed me into your home, offered me some breakfast, some Marmite on toast, and I politely declined. But for you to open your doors to me, that means the world. It really does. The connectivity piece is huge in my life right now.
So you told me this just before we hit record, exactly when our paths first crossed. So talk to me about which platform that was.
It was way back in the early days of the Dark Side Project, and I think it was Instagram and Facebook post, and we're probably talking maybe 8-10 years ago. I wouldn't.
I think the podcast is 8.5 years ago, and I think it was right around that time.
Yeah, so I had to be right around that time, and I remember some of the powerful posts at a very powerful time for me. I remember tagging you in a post where I was trying to address my demons by working out at the training center beforehand, and just how I was feeling before I started. I was like, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's right on point. So.
Well, this is what's beautiful, and my Instagram page was shut down, so trying to be that voice of reason and kindness and compassion in the middle is probably the most censored voice there is out there. You can have porn and violence, and Instagram's fine with it, but it is such a powerful platform. It is such an incredible way to connect people, and whether it's learning of losing one of our brothers and sisters, or whether it's learning of all the ways to heal, putting hope into the fact that there are ways out of this. Even, and I'm sure we'll dive into a little bit, the work week revolution that's happened.
Right.
That word has been shared through the internet, through podcasts, through videos and all these things. So it's amazing if you create your social media to be one of, inspiration and hope, that all the good stuff does start coming across your radar then.
Yeah, definitely. And I've kind of stepped away from the social media as far as Facebook and Instagram and all that, just for my own well-being and mental health. I don't have to be on there, so I don't watch a lot of TV and news, and I'm at the point in my journey where the more positive I can inject into my being, the better. So only real social media, if you want to call it that, is LinkedIn, where I can kind of create my own algorithm and delete and block things I don't want, and then focus on the things I do. So absolutely.
All right. Well, for people listening, if you were at home, which part of the country would we find you in?
Just north of Atlanta, the Atlanta area, North Georgia mountains, probably from the city proper, maybe an hour north towards Tennessee area. So North Georgia mountains.
Were you in any way affected by the hurricane that ended up decimating North Carolina?
No, I was not personally or physically. My daughter lived in North Carolina. They've since moved to Georgia, but they weren't affected by it as well. So no, we got very fortunate. We spooled up all the resources before it, and we were ready, but nothing happened. So
okay, well, good.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's start at the very beginning of your timeline then. So tell me where you were born, and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
All right, so I was born and raised in Kalamazoo, Michigan. That's where my dad was Marine, and my mom, she was going to school to university to be a teacher, and they met in the marching band at Western Michigan University. This was Vietnam era, so my dad was a Marine. He went to Okinawa for a time and stayed in contact with my mom, and then came back and they connected. And then from there, they were very service oriented, like helping your fellow human being. And that was always instilled to us from a very young age. I'm second oldest of 10 kids. So, pretty big family. Second oldest of 10 kids. I've got 2 brothers and 7 sisters. So there's a high female influence in my home, which I attribute to a lot of the caring motherhood side of who I am. Just being there to serve other people. I know a lot of times in the alpha world of firefighting and everything else, we try to put on this huge bravado. And I think that's what's helped me have a healthy career, is to have that motherly service side of aspect to what I'm doing. So, grew up, my parents, that's actually why I'm down here in this area, as my parents aged. Mom's been recently diagnosed with Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia. Dad's dealing with some physical side, so mom's mental cognitive side is going down pretty rapidly, and dad's physical side is going. So as we've rallied the wagon, so to speak, with the siblings and try to take care of my parents, that's why I'm down here, to kind of get eyes on. So
I'm sorry to hear about your parents.
It's a rough thing to watch, but it's also been a blessing as well. To watch them serve their whole lives, to come to a place where they have to receive the service, has been kind of a perspective shift in my mind as well. To sometimes, when we're always the helpers and the healers, we're going to need help in healing as well. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, firstly, that large family, I'm one of 5, so that pales in comparison to yours. But where did you stand as far as chronologically in the brothers and sisters?
I'm second oldest. So I have an older sister. She's no longer mortally on this planet, and I feel her presence pretty regularly. She was born with a brain tumor, brain cancer, wasn't supposed to live past the age of 3, and she lived till she was in her 30s. So like when she turned 30. And quite frankly, even though it hasn't been proven, we think that it's related to the Agent Orange stuff. There's been some studies showing that those soldiers that were exposed to Agent Orange, their firstborns have a lot of the signs and symptoms and diseases that she had, but that's never been proven. But Mindy was an angel on earth. And taught me a lot about being self-aware and welcoming those that are struggling in, even though you have your own struggles, that if you're present, even though you can't be there physically, that if you're always there for them emotionally, things are going to work out. So
when you reflect back now, was her mindset? Because being given a death sentence at the age of 3,
right,
that must just reframe our mortality in a totally different way. And one would assume that maybe there's a lot more gratitude infused when you've got that kind of diagnosis.
Yeah, it was. It was cool to kind of walk our journey together. We went to the same high school. She was 2 years older than me. So to see, because she had kind of a droopy eye from some of her brain surgeries when she was younger, to see the cruelty of humanity, make fun of her for these situations and that kind of thing, and not see her soul and spirit for what it was kind of painful to watch. But she had a great faith. She focused on that faith, and she was very self-aware. She could eat a food, and if it affected her a certain way, as far as the way her body reacted, she knew what the food was and what was in that food. And that's really what elongated her life, was to be self-aware of the foods that affected her negatively, so she could put those positive things in her body, or the things that helped her overcome things. And that's where her light shines. She played the piano on Sunday mornings before church, and there's been times in my home when my kids have kind of musically inclined as well, would play the piano before church, and it automatically takes me back to those times of listening to the piano and just that spiritual side of thing. And music in my family is one of those settling influences. So pretty powerful. She actually did some missionary work in your neck of the woods. She served in Leeds, England.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So, and that's when her final stages of her life actually started. She started having headaches when she was on that mission, came back home and they found another brain tumor, and that's kind of where the health decline started. So
when I was in the school age, the only fights I ever got into were protecting my brother. He was kind of awkward, super intelligent, but socially awkward somewhat, and he would get picked on all the time. We hated each other when we were at home, me and my brother, but if someone picked on him, blood is thicker than water, and and they weren't spectacular fights either, but they were altercations. Did you find yourself kind of stepping up in that way, or was it never to that point?
It really never was to that point. She was, like I said, she was 2 grades higher than me, so it's nothing that I really witnessed. In school, I was kind of a fun-loving. I got along with everybody. I didn't hang out with a certain crowd. I hung out with the punks, or I hung out with the athletes. I played sports in high school, and it was a pretty culturally diverse school. Kalamazoo's halfway between Detroit and Chicago, so it was the early 90s, and it was a great time to be alive and just connect to somebody, regardless of the way I approach things. It's not no color, N-O color, it's K-N-O-W color. No, understand color, understand the cultural differences, connect to people. It's not seeing that they're different, it's seeing the differences, finding those 1 or 2 things that we can connect on, and building our relationships off those things. So that's kind of where I was in high school, in the powerful side of things, and the way I was growing up. I was in Boy Scouts at the time, and achieved my Eagle Scout status. Well, my mom achieved my Eagle Scout status. She was pretty persistent in making sure that I accomplished that. I obtained my Eagle Scout when I was 13 years old, and was able to move on to the perfumes and the car fumes, to focus on becoming an adolescent. So there's a lot of things I learned through the Boy Scouts as well in that time of my life that I carry on to this day as a firefighter. So
that is what's such a shame. When my son was young, it was only for a little bit, he expressed interest in that organization. But there's, obviously that other side where we know that there was, incidences where people were allowed around to be around children. And then in some cases, it wasn't even addressed within the organization. For people listening now, talk to me about the benefits of that, and how, how did you put your kids in that at all?
We tried to. My son actually late diagnosed in life. It wasn't until he graduated high school that he got his autism diagnosis, which shined a light on a lot of things. Caleb's very intellectual, but there was a lot of things I tried to, like I said, I was an athlete. I was trying to get him to do all these things that I did because they were beneficial to me, and it just didn't click for him because that's not who it was. So yeah, we've always been involved. The religion I grew up in, there's regular times where on Sundays you'd stand up in front of the congregation and do a speech in front of the congregation on whatever religious topic was going on that Sunday. And then with Boy Scouts, to do my Eagle Scout project, to have to reach out and at the time send letters, because this was before computers. I'm dating myself. Computers were at their very beginning stages, but to have to go out and shake hands and look people in the eyes and connect with people to get things done is a huge part of the foundation of who I am today.
Because I think it's a shame. I mean, it's a great organization, and but it did put red flags up in me. And what I ended up doing is like, right, how can I mirror that within groups that I feel comfortable with at this moment?
Right.
But, I've got friends that were, are Scoutmasters themselves now that are, amazing, trustworthy, phenomenal human beings. But it's just a shame that some people are kind of dissuaded a little bit to what I would argue is a very positive organization, because as we see in life so often, the actions of the few, ruin it for the masses.
Right. And I was very fortunate. It was also a good time to connect with my father because he was a Scoutmaster at times. He was a school teacher by trade, so he taught in the public education system for 30 plus years, and quite frankly, probably has more PTSD from being a teacher than from the time he spent in Vietnam. I remember many nights of him grading papers, watching MASH on TV because he could connect with the guys on MASH, and he was grading papers at night watching MASH something that he was comfortable with. So like I said, I think the public education system caused more PTSD and issues in his life and where his mental state is than actual serving in the military. Mm-hmm. But that was my time to connect with Dad. He put a lot of time and effort. Dad is a MacGyver, so he would have been a great firefighter.
Beautiful. When you talked about Agent Orange, my father-in-law actually has been fighting that, for a long time. He's had multiple bouts of illnesses because of that. It's interesting because, you have that now, you see all these cancers and deaths from the burn pits and the current military generation.
Right.
But then you listen to the science of Sarah Jenke, for example, talking about our profession and all the childhood diseases that we're seeing and the infertility and, the miscarriages. And, sadly, I think a lot of people think, oh, it's the fires, it's the toxins. But actually, if you look at the impact of sleep deprivation and shift work, that is actually a massive contributor to that. So one of the biggest things that I'm trying to get people to understand is, you might beat your chest and be like, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I'm Kurt Russell, 2025. Right. Okay, hero, that's great. What if I told you that by you not fighting for a work week that's healthy, your child could have brain cancer, your child could have leukemia, could have Down syndrome, could have autism, could have, not that, some of those are not even terrible to have, of course, but the fatal ones, does that not wake you up and say, I'm going to fight against that? The people in Vietnam, I'm sure in 2025, you need to stop dropping Agent Orange on us. There's a certain point where okay, enough is enough. Right. This is what I feel in our profession, mm-hmm. and people aren't talking about it is, it is affecting our children, our ability to reproduce healthily and the health of the offspring when they're born.
Right, definitely. And I feel that 100%. This is probably the point in the podcast where I drop the disclaimer that my viewpoints and my perspectives are those of my own and not of the agency that I work for and puts a paycheck in my bank every 2 weeks. And I'm pretty passionate about the health and wellness side of things. That's kind of what's brought me down to Florida is I used to do a lot of work with the Florida Firefighter Safety Health Collaborative for just these things. I was Dark Side Project, Fit to Fight Fire, all these good agencies or good initiatives opened my eyes to the power of physical fitness and mental health and cancer prevention and all this other kind of stuff. And at the time, Florida was the place that was doing it right. Chris Bader started the collaborative with Sam Eaton and Dustin Hawkins, and there's all kinds of names that are connected. And I got connected with them because I was kind of the unofficial wellness person in my department, because we do a good job at a lot of things in my department. One of the things we don't is manage projects well. So if you would ask me years ago where I would say that the places we're failing, it's the admin positions to handle all the special projects so that the line personnel can do line personnel things. And that's where the ball gets dropped a lot, because it's not if a person's working on one of those special projects, it's not their primary role in the fire service. So a lot of times that ball gets dropped. And the wellness issues a lot of times are check the box initiatives. All right, we do annual health screenings, or we're going to buy gear extractors, but they're government bid, low bid gear extractors that don't have the right pH in the water, the chemicals, the cleaning products or detergents to do what they need to do. The sleep hygienes in the firehouses, the work week. We recently at my department looked at changing to a different schedule. We work the typical 24-48 schedule, and there was an initiative they were going to change to the Portland schedule, because biggest reason they were going to do that is because we wouldn't have to hire a whole nother shift or a whole nother platoon. So we could keep our current staffing, just change the work week. So instead of doing the exact right things, we try to chip away at things and do things at the speed of government. And quite frankly, it never gets to the destination that we need to get to.
It's interesting. I had a conversation with one of the Orange County Union guys, and he was at Tallahassee, and Danny Alvarez and Erica Roth were proposing several things in Florida, including making a 42-hour, this is shorter, but it's a 42-hour work week, a professional standard in the state of Florida, which I think that would be phenomenal. I mean,
Right.
with the whole state of Florida goes to it, now we're really going to have ripple effects through the rest of the states. And so I said to him, well, that's amazing. How are you going as far as 2472? Oh, well, this will be the first step. And I told him, like, well, no. Like, legislation is not how you make changes in a fire department. If that was the case, then the city of Gainesville and Miramar and Destin and, Palm Beach County and Pasco County and all these departments, they still wouldn't have made the move. What happened is a bunch of courageous men and women got together, whether it was their admin, their union, whoever it was that got behind it, and said, you know what, this isn't working. And we need to change it, because you can do whatever you want in the fire department. You can accept laterals if you decide. You make your own rules pretty much.
Right.
And so this whole, we got to wait for politicians to fix it for us. Like, yeah, that's the coward's way of doing it. Or you could grow a set and just say, enough is enough. I'm tired of burying our men and women. We need to fix this, and we're just going to start now. Because as you said, the box checking isn't working. We got a Plime event. We got an extractor. We've got a peer support team, and we just went to another funeral. Miami-Dade's had 3 in 8 months. So is it working? No, it's not. So what can we do differently? And then what's beautiful now is you can go to Florida and say, all right, let's say it's Miami-Dade, Palm Beach County. How did you get this started? Let's say you're a mid-sized department in Gainesville. How did you make this work? So this is what drives me crazy now. If politicians fix things, we wouldn't have an obesity crisis and an opioid crisis, because they would have fixed it years ago. So waiting for some, person in a suit, and there are some good ones, and Danny I'll put up there, but waiting for people to fix things for you, we know that doesn't work. So newsflash, if you actually want to make changes, you got to do it yourself. Whether you freaking pick up a microphone and start a podcast, or whether you start a collaborative down south, or whether you start an Instagram page and show workouts, whatever it is, we're all a piece of the movement. But it drives me crazy when people are hiding behind litigation, or it's not litigation, but these laws being put in place. Or the one thing I hear all the time, studies. Oh, do you have data? And I know I'm beating a dead horse, but like, people ask me that. Can you send me studies that a 42-hour work week is healthier than a 56? And I always say, like, yeah, I've got another study as well. It's a study on if it hurts when you get stabbed with a kitchen knife. Do you want me to send that as well? Of course it's fucking better. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. At what point are you going to just go, it's common sense? And I think this is what we need to do as a profession now, is take a step back. What is working? What isn't working? And what can we just band together and say, we're going to fix this? And like you said, moving the shifts around of a 56-hour week is still a 56-hour week. The way that you improve people's health, the way that you attract young people back into the profession, is you actually finally make the work week the same as everyone else, 42 hours.
100%. And why should a salary have to change because we're changing our work week? Like you said.
It doesn't. You go to training. I tell people, you go to training. Do they cut your hours? No. That's a complete myth that people put out there because they don't want to actually have the courage to make changes. So they find every excuse of why not to do it. Number of pushback I've had from firefighters. Oh, they'll never work. They'll never go for it. We don't have the money. Like, imagine if the World War II generation thought that. We'd be speaking German right now.
Right. In the past 6 to 8 months in my department alone, we're a public safety department. We've got about 100 firefighters. And then we've got, on the police side, that 150-ish range on the police side. And our department alone, in the past 6 to 8 months, we've lost 3 people to cancer. 2 of the guys, firefighters, that were 2 to 3 years from retirement. A police officer that was 4 months from retirement.
God. Horrendous. And again, like I always say, how many do we have to lose? Like I've said, tongue in cheek, just give me a number. We've lost, throwing a number out, we lost 300 this year. We lost 297 this year. Well, make it to 300 and then we'll start changing. All right. Any volunteers? Right. We need to get to 300. All right, boom, now we're going to start changing. But it's not. We keep losing them over and over and over again. And I don't understand how you can be the chief of a department, a union president, or just anyone else within, wearing the same uniform, and just be like, oh, well, shrug shoulders, let's give them a nice funeral with bagpipes and folded flags, and then let's just go back to work. Let's just keep doing the same thing. Like, at what point do you say this is wrong? At what point do you really understood what a brotherhood and sisterhood is, which you honor the ones that you lost by fucking changing things?
And I think it comes from a level of understanding as well. Are we doing what we need to do to educate those decision makers on what we actually do for a living.
100%.
I mean, do they understand you can't do it with a Citizens Academy or anything else? Come spend a month with me at the firehouse. Get up 3 or 4 times a night to go pick up grandma or whatever, which I understand that's what we do. That's a huge part of my moral injury piece is I'm up at the same firehouse where I took the phone call from my mom to say that my sister just passed away from her cancers. I'm assigned at that firehouse right now to where I'm picking up grandma 4 or 5 times a night at an old folks home that they're spending $4 or $5 grand a month to be at. Yet the people that are supposed to issue the care aren't doing the care. They call 911 to get $1.5 million fire truck with 4 salaried firefighters up there to pick up grandma off the floor when I can't be down in Spring Hill, Florida to pick my mom up when she falls and breaks her leg. That's a huge moral injury piece for me. And that's my journey. That's just where I'm at. So those are things I've had to deal with personally. So it's not isolated to just the calls that we run. It's everything else that we're exposed to that ties into our life events as well.
Oh, absolutely. And then again, it's where is the voice of going to, for example, a nursing home and saying, no, like you need to hire 2 porters or whatever it is. If your nurses can't put someone back to bed, and I'm not talking about injured and they need a hospital stay, of course, that's where we come in. That's what we're paid to do. But a back to bed call in a medical facility, you should have people on staff that can return that person to bed. That is not the fire department's job. Like we were talking before we hit record. I've always said that one of the most rewarding things we've ever done in our department is when you have that elderly couple in their home, you know, and the husband is full of guilt and shame because he was an able-bodied guy like you and me once, and now he doesn't have the strength to lift the love of his life off the floor, and she's soiled herself, and we come in and we clean her up and we put new clothes on her and we put her back to bed. That is a beautiful thing, but that's a home. That's a residential home. A facility, like where you said they're paying, you know, the government or the individual is paying all that money, that's not where we're supposed to go. And for every time that we're doing that call, we might be missing the stroke, the choking, the cardiac arrest, the horrendous wreck where they're bleeding out and trapped. So it's not, you know, it's also about having the courage to say no. And this is why I love GMR with their nurse navigation, integrating 911 and taking all these non-emergent calls and sending them to through these nurses, assigning resources that are non-emergent that are totally appropriate for those calls. Urgent care clinic appointments, telehealth consultations so they can refill a prescription, dentists and optometrists and all these other things that we get called, even the low acuity mental health calls. Right. There are so many resources that are available that are so much cheaper, that keep an ER bed and that don't wake up a crew. But again, where is the courage to say, why the hell are we going to these calls? But it's this fear of litigation. But, you can't sue everyone for everything. At some point, you've just got to say, all right, we're going to do this. And if you come at us with the lawsuit, well, we've done this, and this. So we did our due diligence. We sent them to the appropriate thing for that call. We gave them the option to call 911 and we actually go back and help them. But I mean, how many people just want literally to feel better or need a refill or whatever it is? They don't need, as you said, $1.5 million apparatus with 4 burly men and women coming with stretchers and monitors and everything for their 18-month-old with a fever. They just want to know what to do. So, but it takes courage from our leadership to say, yeah, we're not going to send our men and women on those kind of non-emergencies. That's not appropriate.
Well, that ties into the shift schedule as well. It's not every alarm that bangs out's a fire alarm where we're running 1,000 calls a year versus 5,000 calls a year, because we're having to get up to run all these medical calls. And I've been a paramedic. I've been a paramedic my whole career. So I value the medical side of things. Quite frankly, I feel that I've had more effect on my population, my community, the people I respond to as a paramedic than I do as a firefighter.
100%.
Because when we show up, regardless of what we do, just us showing up fixes the situation for that person. Their emergency stops when we show up. I've had more connections and relationships with former patients, not because I started an IV on that patient, but because I was able to ride in the back of the box holding their hand to comfort them the last 10 miles of their journey and connect at a personal level, what sometimes they're not going to get. I've been very fortunate. I know one of your struggles in your career is that you haven't had any cardiac arrest saves. No. You've mentioned that multiple times. I've been very fortunate that I've been able to be a vehicle or a tool in the Lord's hand to bring people back from when they had a cardiac arrest, to walk at American Health Walk with somebody that we brought back, and then she's had her second child, to see one of the people that we saved at the YMCA after he had a heart attack, cardiac arrest, show up to our community CPR classes to share his story, to be able to connect those two people as peers so they can share in their journey, why am I still alive after this event happened to me?
Mm-hmm.
During COVID times, we had a guy that, and I'm not going to get in the conversation on immunizations or anything like that, but he had a recent shot and had a cardiac arrest. His wife was walking him to the bathroom, had an arrest, and he fell on top of her.
Ooh.
But to be able to connect with her, that a year later after their arrest, I get a knock at the door at the firehouse, and she's saying, "Hey, my therapist said I need to come by and see you because your name keeps coming up because of the compassion and empathy that you showed to me on that scene." And to be able to go to her townhouse and help her change light bulbs, and to do this or to do that, or carry a bag of mulch to her backyard so that she could keep maintaining her house because her husband is no longer there to do it. To have that connectivity is what fuels my fire.
It's funny when you think about the assignments coming from beyond. You know, they're like, all right, Mark's going to go to a cardiac arrest. Who wants to go? Jesus? All right, yeah, go help him save. All right, James has got one. Anyone? And the Reaper puts up his hand again. Like, fuck. All right, come on.
All right.
I can see it in my mind. And these poor people, like, you know, as the tunnel is closing
the
and they see James Gearing as their medic.
The graphic nozzle of James Gearing, huh?
All right, well, let's go kind of your journey into the fire service then. So just to kind of back up a little bit, firstly, when you're in the school age, what kind of sports and exercise were you doing and playing? Because you're still in incredible shape now.
I appreciate that. I hit 52 years old yesterday, so I played Little League Baseball all growing up. I was never really good at it. Very fortunate to get into a team sport during that time. By the time I hit high school, I was really not good. I stopped playing baseball JV year, but that's when I transitioned a lot into football. And that's where I learned the importance of a mentor and a coach and somebody there to hold you accountable to do things. That it's not just showing up. It's the time that you put in off the field as much as it is the time you put in on the field. And I remember my freshman JV coach, Coach Signeski, Coach Sig, seeing my ability, even though I was a smaller kid, I was probably at that time 120, 130, 130 pounds, to see the potential in me to do what I had to do. And I wasn't a starter at all. I wasn't the first guy. I rode the bench a lot, but I put in a lot of time and effort. Coach Sig gave me my nickname. So I know all the people that have known me for a while because they call me by my nickname Mo, and that's a term of an endearment. So, matter of fact, my best friend in high school, his name is Marc as well. He was born, today's his birthday. Happy birthday, Marc. But our moms actually shared a common room in the hospital the day we were born. So I've known him my whole life, and my oldest married his oldest.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they've got 3 kids, so we share common grandchildren in that aspect as well. But
that's crazy. Happy birthday to you as well, by the way.
Thank you. So football was a huge part, and that's when I started weightlifting, and I played offensive line. In high school, our offensive line averaged right around 300 pounds.
Bloody hell.
And I was probably 150, 170 at the time. But when I started lifting weights, I was lifting weights with the linemen. So my senior year in high school, I'm 150 pounds benching 315 pounds because I didn't know any better. I was in there working out with the linemen, and I really enjoyed the weightlifting side of things, the strength aspect. My heritage, I'm Polish on my dad's side and Syrian on my Polish and Syrian on my dad's side, and kind of German and the European side on my mom's side. But I definitely got that Eastern Bloc strongman strength. So it's a lot of good genetics is what it is. It's nothing that I do that's special. So football and wrestling and that kind of stuff. But I definitely learned the value of connection and working towards a common mission and a common goal, regardless of how we look or who we are.
I always ask people this. I was a martial artist and I played field hockey. It was my sport, which I play football too, like real football with your feet. But
my brother's a soccer player, so my little brother is. Yeah.
But yeah, hockey is actually, it's fun. I mean, I always feel like I'm justifying it now. It's funny, just looking at that, like I'm obviously, worried about it. I have to explain what it is. But yeah, you basically run around with a stick and you get to hit other people. But but that being said, so, I had team sports, plural, and then the martial arts, it's just you on the mat. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting kind of unpacking what each of those two experiences did as far as, when you progress into the fire service.
Oh, yeah.
So when you reflect, what did you pull from each of those?
So I wrestled as well. So I definitely get that kind of dedication that it takes to have that individual accountability as well. And quite frankly, all too often in my life, I've felt the big transformation that's foreshadowing down the road is my own self-worth. So the thing I've struggled throughout my life is feeling less than, feeling that imposter syndrome that so many of your guests have talked about.
So many of my high performing, like Delta and elite athlete guests, this is crazy. It's all of us.
Yeah. So and that's the thing, those individual sports highlight that personal accountability to be able, and I wasn't a good wrestler. I didn't enjoy it one bit. But it's the hard things is where we learn a lot about ourselves. And once again, another great coach that he's still alive, still around, Coach Wiley, saw in me what I couldn't see in myself and just continued to push me. And even though I wasn't your first one on the mat, he pushed me through to my limits, to realize that my own personal limits are my limits, that there's a much bigger world out there. So
when you reflect back now with this mature, very mature, 52 years old, bloody hell. I'm 51, so I'm shitting you.
Yeah.
When you reflect though, and you unpack your early life, what was it? What was that dynamic that forged that low self-esteem, do you think?
I was kind of a shy kid, and we're going to get deep in the mental health and in dark places side of things. Things I remember the most, back in the day, my second elementary school, because we moved when I was in kindergarten, my first year in the public education system. The school was about a mile away, and it was in a time where your kid could walk to school for a mile and be safe. And I remember going by myself, and back when I played soccer or football or whatever you want to term you want to use, I remember one day after soccer practice, there were some big kids that started bullying me. And I remember being in the gym and them taking one of those big gray trash cans like the ones we usually keep in the bay at the firehouse, and putting that trash can over me and saying, "Don't get out of here or we're going to beat the tar out of you." Probably one of the earliest traumatic experiences that I can remember in my life. And it's crazy to go there in my head because I don't think about it often, but to go back there, the things we are exposed to as children very often guides us how we are as adults. Very often when we're going through our hard times as adults, we revert back to those childish-like feelings when we're going through those dark times. And that's one specific incident that that I was able to address and overcome. And I don't think I've ever shared that with even my mom or anything else, because you know how mama bears get when that kind of stuff happens. But it always feels like just I can't do anything right. Anything I put my time and effort to, it doesn't get recognized. And then 2 years down the road, somebody else picks up the ball, so to speak, and finishes the job, and they get all the praises and accolades for it. I've never been the guy in the spotlight, and I'm not comfortable in the spotlight. So,
do you think some of that also comes from being one of 8? Is that right?
One of 10.
One of
Yeah.
10.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Because your sister as well. Excuse me. So, because when I think back to, I've said this, my childhood, we were pretty much feral. Like we ran around on the farm all day, every day.
Wonderful.
We came back covered in mud and,
Yes.
Kicked by a horse and whatever else happened. But when I reflect back, Like, for example, I love my dad, but as far as like being seen, there wasn't really that element. Like I won national championships in martial arts. You never watched me fight once, ever. If you were interested in something he was interested in, you stepped inside his circle, then yeah. But if you weren't, and so again, when I look back, there was the same thing. I'm like, I was very meek when I was young. I was small too. I didn't have my growth spurt till I was 18. So I was still skinny and tiny when everyone else had beards and deep voices. And
Right.
I'm James Gearing. And even now, it's not like I'm a monster by any means, but I'll give you a perfect example. I was rolling not too long ago in jiu-jitsu, and I was talking to this guy, and he probably was like 150 pounds, 145 maybe. And I was telling him, yeah, us small guys. And I remember him looking at me like, what are you talking about? Because I'm 180 now and 6 foot. But in my mind, I'm still little James,
Right, exactly.
And so it's funny how we just cling on to that so hard, and everything in front of you look at your resume of what you've done.
Right.
You're like, oh yeah, but it's always, oh yeah, but that's not, but look at this person. They were in 9/11, or they were, they won the UFC heavyweight champion. You only just won this tippy-tappy taekwondo thing. Whatever it is, it's always kind of downplaying it, and recognizing it is good because you can kind of push away from that. But like you said, here we are sitting across from each other 50 years later. These childhood things are still there. They still are ingrained in your mind.
It's kind of like cracks in the foundation.
Absolutely. So you've got that element. So anyway, I think there was a question at the very beginning. So did you feel like you were able to get enough attention being one of 10 in the family dynamic?
I did. I mean, our house was always kind of like the landing place. We had probably more stray people in our house than we had stray pets. Very diverse. My parents growing up in the 60s and 70s and everything else. Yes, love was a huge part of our house and our culture. And with my recent experiences, love is the answer. As hippie as it sounds.
100%. I mean, isn't that what all the holy books talk about?
Right. Love is the answer.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting. I shared, and you wouldn't have seen this because you're not on social media, but I shared a video, and it was a bunch of Vietnam veterans at a bar talking about one of them had been hit by a mortar, and it actually had a General Motors logo on it. And he's saying, like, I thought they were supposed to make cars, and I got blown up by one of their weapons. But the way they're talking about the industrial military complex and how they came home and no one cares, you could literally have put that in a bar in 2020 with a bunch of, Iraq and Afghanistan veterans having the same exact conversation. And like you said, here we are repeating the same mistakes and allowing our, boys and girls to be sent off to wars that maybe we should never have been in the first place, when really diplomacy, love, community is the answer. And now, what we're seeing currently, I mean, just to be very clear, I can't stand any of the people that we've had in the helm of this country recently. So this is apolitical.
Right.
But here we are again, pushing buttons and poking bears. And the people doing that, they're not the ones that are going to pay for it.
Exactly.
It's our children, again, they're going to come back in caskets draped in our flags.
Right. So to go back to your question, no, not intentionally. I don't think that I felt like I had to keep up with anybody in my own household. Everybody was loved. Being from such a big family, there's a top five. The 5 oldest have pretty good relationships with each other, and there's my baby sister is 18 years difference than me. So the year I graduated, she was born. So there's connections and family friends that I have no clue who they are because I had already left the nest and continued on my journey while that stuff was still kind of happening. So.
What were you dreaming of becoming when you were in the school age?
I don't know that I had any dreams. I wasn't that guy that kid that wanted to see a firefighter. I wasn't enamored by fire trucks. I was an inquisitive kid. I like to take things apart, not necessarily put them back together, but I like to take things apart and see how they work. Fast forwarding a little bit, I went and did some missionary work in South America. And while I was doing that, I came back. I was like, what do I want to do when I get back? And I took an EMT class. And that's kind of what started my journey into the fire career. But I remember taking anatomy and physiology. And gross anatomy was probably one of my favorite classes, as morbid as it sounds. But to pop the hood on the human body and to see the actual physical organs and how they work and where they're at and that kind of stuff was very intriguing to me. So,
Absolutely.
as far as wanting to be something, I don't think I had that much of a vision or forethought to say this is what I want to be when I grow up.
When you reflect on your time in South America, because I love this, I think there's a I think it's Mark Twain quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically the enemy of prejudice is travel.
Right.
And it's so true. You think
100%.
about, what we talk about other countries because they didn't join us in a war or, whatever it is. And then people go there and they're like, oh, they're actually quite nice.
Right.
So when you reflect back, what were the things that really were endearing about that experiences? And then maybe what were some of the things that weren't so good that you witnessed?
So once again, I was born and raised in Kalamazoo. So my first trip on an airplane was to fly out to Utah to go to the training center before I flew to Chile to go do my missionary work for 2 years. And it's something that was through my church at the time, that's just something you did when you became that age, an earmark. And it's really one of those things that solidified my service aspect of my life, but also gave me all the tools and everything that I need to be a successful human being, to be able to connect with people without the distractions of the news or this or that. While you're there, you're essentially selling your earthly possessions and going to be fishers of men with Jesus. And faith is a huge part of who I am. I understand there's people that struggle with faith. I'm a very spiritual person and connected person, and it provided me that opportunity to do that without any distractions. I recently started reading the book, The Gulag Archipelago, and in it, I'm going to share a quote since you opened the quote door.
Let's do it.
It says, "The intellectual is not defined by professional pursuit and type of occupation, nor are good upbringing and a good family enough in themselves to produce an intellectual. An intellectual is a person whose interest and occupation with the spiritual side of life are insistent and constant and not forced by external circumstances, even flying in the face of them." So it's who we are as human beings. It's not the things that we learn and the certificates that we have. It's those life experiences that make us who we are. And to be able to meet people in their own homes, much like we're doing here, to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ to them in their own homes, to bring it to them in their own language, which is a powerful tool to me, to have Spanish in my toolbox, to be able to speak Spanish. We run a lot of calls on that, people, and it's amazing to me to see that somebody in an emergency situation, the minute I start speaking their language, even though they're in a foreign land, the walls are dropped immediately. And that connection is there. And I've often been told that my Spanish sounds like a native speaker. It doesn't sound like a gringo speaking Spanish. And Chile, South America, the way the people embraced me really showed to me that it doesn't matter what kind of house you're living in or where you're at. As long as you're giving that love piece, that's all that matters. You have everything that you need. I had some absolute phenomenal experiences in South America, but I've also had some traumatic ones as well. I mean, yes, I was loved by the people there, but there are people that saw me as an American there. I mean, up until 1973, Chile was a dictatorship. There's been all kinds of Nazi connections and everything with the mountains of Chile and everything else. So there was a time of civil unrest in that country. So they associated me with the American ideology, not for who I was. And that's my biggest struggle in life. I'm Marc, regardless of what religion I am, or that I wear the uniform of a firefighter, it doesn't define who I am as a person. Yes, it's a piece of me, but it doesn't define me. And due to that, seeing us as Americans, there was a time when we were having a meeting in one of the churches and the doorbell rang because in South America, there's fences around the churches to kind of protect them. And some of the other missionaries went to answer the gate and didn't come back. Then all of a sudden, next thing I know, there's a bunch of armed, like with automatic weapons, guys coming in with their faces covered, pointing weapons at us and threatening to kill us. And just for who we were. And for some reason, they fired a couple shots and everything, didn't kill anybody. But at some point, they made the decision to release us. And as we're running out, on the tile floors, the terrazzo floors, I remember the smell of gasoline slipping on the slippery floor. They'd poured a bunch of gas on it and they lit it on fire. So they were going to leave us in there and light the place on fire and kill us. But for some reason, last minute decision, we were able to get out.
That's crazy. And again, there you are in a place that's supposed to be about kindness, compassion, community. Right. And then you have that, like we said, that tyranny, that nasty side that's allowed to rise up. And this is what's so maddening is, I say this all the time. Do you think that most Russians were like, yeah, you know what I want to do today is go into another country and bomb men, women, and children? Of course not.
You're right.
Do most Chileans feel that way about, no. Now, if they feel like, maybe they're being occupied, or if a religion is being forced on them or something, there might be more pushback. But it doesn't matter where you are on the planet. If you look at the holy books that have really survived all this time, at the core, it's the kindness, compassion, love thing that has survived. People kind of pick up, minutia, like, oh yeah, but not the gays, or whatever their kind of prejudice that they found between the lines. But no, let's take it down to just the bare bones. What are these books telling us? Don't kill each other. Don't carry that hate. Like, that's done nothing in, the year 200, 400, 1100. All we've seen is pain and misery, and no one ever wins except the person in the castle. And that's what they're trying to tell us. And here we are now in 2025. And, I did a post this morning because I truly believe this. I think the evolution of man is kindness and compassion. I think that the holy books and the other, ancient wisdom that we've been able to carry through, writing especially, has allowed us to kind of metamorphosize, would that be right? Morph into more kind, compassionate human beings. And you 100%. Look at Old Testament versus New Testament, you look at the Dark Ages and medieval torture and the witch trials versus to, how we are today. And there's so many lessons in that. But if we refuse to learn the lessons, history will repeat itself. Syria, Gaza, wherever it is, Northern Ireland, if hate is allowed to be perpetrated, and don't get me wrong, there are origin stories of all those things. I totally understand that. But until the generation says, I'm tired of these dominoes falling, I don't want my kids to be brought up to hate someone because they're from this country or this religion or whatever. Until we rise up as a species, as humanity, it's going to keep happening again. And it's, the guys under the mask, under different times, you probably would have had a blast over a beer or a coffee. And instead, there you are in that situation where they're about to shoot you and burn you.
100%. And to figure out where we're going, we have to know where we came from. And that's really what it boils down to, is that power of connectivity. That's the authenticity and connectivity. That's where it's at.
Absolutely. Well, we're kind of jumping ahead, but while we're on the faith subject, we were talking before we hit record. Talk to me about the kind of evolution of your journey, faith versus rigid religion.
Oh, wow. I don't think there's enough time in the podcast. This could be a docuseries. Once again, I grew up, so the same religion my whole life, and it instilled in me all those very positive values and great things that help make me who I am. And I mentioned it earlier, it doesn't define who I am, but it's a huge piece of who I am, and has provided me with a lot of situations with it. So there came a point, and it's hard to put a date or a time on it. It's just, I'm very connected. I love nature, as I'm sure you do as well. I love hiking. I love kayaking. I love just being out. Nature is my church. That's where I feel God the most, is feel small, just to see a butterfly fluttering around and understand where it came from, or whatever birds. I know there's been plenty of shifts where I've got to work early and I've sat on the front pad of the firehouse and listened to the birds in the morning. In my rocking chair, people give me a hard time about my rocking chair. I guess it's the 52 years old, I guess. But connection with nature and music, and there's so many powerful things that impact my soul that it came to a point where I don't want to be confined by the walls of a church or the SOPs or SOGs or articles or whatever guidelines for the way I'm supposed to worship that are created by man. And I know there's prophets out there and people that have those connections that are the mouthpiece of God on this earth. I understand that, but there's the fallibilities of human beings as well, that at some point when you're in charge of something, you get that bravado, that authoritative type aspect that isn't necessarily God's will all the time. So I kind of took a step away from the physical side of church to work on my own personal relationship with my Savior, Jesus Christ, without borders. There's a saying out there, there's no atheist in foxholes. Mm-hmm. I've got a picture. My wife gifted me a painting of Christ reaching down deep into the water to pull the drowning person out. So you see Christ kind of blurry with his hand going down into the water to pull those people out of the depths. And I felt like Peter so many times where I've had the faith to step out of the boat and walk towards God and walk on water. But even though he's standing there right in front of me, that doubt starts sinking in. Even though the vision's clear, I've got it inked on my skin. Sometimes I feel like the hand that's under the water drowning. Sometimes I feel like the hand that's helping pull people out. And there's a lot of empathy that comes with that, and understanding that Christ, just like us, and we talked about us as children, was meek and mild and walked around.
The meek shall inherit the earth.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that he was timid, that he let people beat him down. I mean, there's plenty of instances of when he threw the money changers out of the temple because they weren't doing what was right.
Mm-hmm. And again, the temple.
Right.
You know, this kind of worshiping and financially benefiting from religion, right, versus being out there, and then just start to interrupt.
No, not at all.
Yeah, one thing that always irks me is you see these people that we know, you know, it's a very Christian country. I mean, they're diverse religions, but we have a lot of Christians here. But then you see how people treat each other. You see how people are on the roads. And it's like, well, you know, you see people say, well, Narcan's a waste of money on addicts, or we need to shoo these homeless to a different town. Mm-hmm. It's like, what would Jesus do? What would Buddha do? What would Krishna do? What would all these, you know, prophets, all these visions of goodness actually do if they were out there?
Right.
You know, would they roll their eyes because you got a back to bed call? Or would they go, okay, great, it's an opportunity to do some good in the world? You're not going to be on the front of Firehouse magazine on this one, but you're doing something good. And that's where I have a problem. And again, I've got no skin in the game. You do you. But for me personally, like you, where I see nature, I see good. And I think, you know, really what Jesus and all these other ones represent is the collective goodness in humanity. And this is a beacon. This is an example of a really good person. And, you know, obviously you can go deeper and, you know, they were sent here for a reason and all that kind of thing. But ultimately, to me, they represent, whether it's, you know, Gandhi or, you know, whoever the other people that we've kind of seen, you know, these real beacons of kindness and compassion. It's a reminder, like, that's who you're supposed to be. You know, I really believe that people are inherently good. You go to a preschool,
100%.
How many like fist fights and gangs do you see in a kindergarten? Mm-hmm. You see a bunch of kids of all colors and creeds laughing and chasing a ball around. Right. That's who we're supposed to be, in my opinion. So sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
No, not at all. And it's not about, as in the fire service, it's not about the calls. Yes, we have those sentinel calls that we're going to carry with us. And Dina Ali talks about it all the time. It's not the calls that do it. I truly think that it's that moral injury piece.
Yes.
That really affects us, that we carry with us. Because we can attribute a call we ran or something with that call we ran to our personal life, or things that are going on in our personal life. Or our department, we're blessed. We've got great top of the line equipment, top of the line apparatus, and we're very progressive when it comes to the medical side of things. But say, for example, we ran a pediatric arrest, and the ambulance carries different size eye gels than what we carry. And the other paramedic on my truck asked for their smallest eye gel. Well, it wasn't a pediatric one. And on that call, we used that one. I mean, it was all good in the end. It's not like it hampered the care of the patient, but just those little kind of things like, oh, that one little thing didn't go right. Even though all these other things went right, we focus on that negative side of things. And I think as first responders and firefighters, we carry that with us, because all of these SOPs and SOGs and hundreds of pages of things that we're supposed to follow and have memorized in our head, and then we mess up once. And we're held accountable for it.
And you're sleep deprived too, which doesn't set you up for remembering in the first place.
Yeah. So, and that ties back into the spiritual side of things, because we can't separate our mind and our body and our soul. we're a holistic human being. So unless we're focusing on all of those things, the spiritual side of us isn't in harmony, is not in coherence.
Absolutely. I think someone said this to me recently, and I realized this is what I do anyway, but they were like, who says that you have to do everything the way that one religion says? Why can't you take, well, I like this from Buddhism, and I like this from, Islam, or whatever the things are. Like, we are a complete, unique, smorgasbord of every event that's happened to us, and our DNA and our environment and all these other things. And it's the same even with healing, with mental health. You know that you're talking to the wrong person when they tell you that their therapy works for everyone. Bullshit. Right. Nothing works for everyone. No nutrition plan works for everyone. No strength and conditioning plan works for everyone.
100%.
Yeah, everyone has their own individual toolbox.
We're a science experiment.
Yeah. So why is it any different with faith? You've had a certain upbringing. I grew up in being exposed to the Church of England.
Right.
There were parts of it, like I said, the kindness, compassion community that I saw, the kindness, compassion community that I saw in England as a young boy that was infused in our television programs. Beautiful. But then, as I got older and they're like, God loves everyone except these people, and these people aren't going to heaven because they don't believe what we believe. That's what I'm like, I'm going to discard that, as Bruce Lee said, absorb what is useful. I'm going to keep all the cool, the kindness stuff, definitely, and love thy neighbor and all that, and, thou shalt not kill. But where you're telling me that this is a sin, from the very children that, in my opinion, God made, it doesn't align with me. Sorry. Right. So what is wrong with that? What is like saying just carving off? It's like a sculpture. By the time you're done, this is my faith. This is James Gearing's unique faith, because it doesn't affect anyone else, because it's me and God. We're having a one-on-one conversation.
Right, 100%.
So your opinion of my faith shouldn't matter, especially as long as it's not out there hurting people. It's the opposite. You're getting rid of all the hurt and keeping all the love, kindness, and compassion.
Right.
That's why if you don't feel 100% comfortable with wherever you've chosen to pray,
right,
what's stopping you from changing it? What's stopping you from curating it to fix what you think is the truly right path? Right as far as kindness and compassion, not right escaping a lake of fire and a little dude with a pitchfork or whatever you might think, but actually, while you're living this now, which one is aligning most clearly with the very things that all these prophets seem to be talking about? Kindness, compassion, community.
By their fruits you shall know them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to your journey into the fire service then. So you weren't dreaming of it when you were younger?
I was not, no.
How did you said about the EMT class. So kind of walk me through the front door, and then let's also talk about like fitness standards, mental health conversations at the beginning of your career. Okay.
So I came back from Chile, South America, 2 years on a mission, looked for something to do. Signed up for an EMT class. So I went to, at the time was Rick's College. It's BYU, Idaho now. So it's actually a private school that's associated with the religion I grew up in, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it was the absolute last thing that I wanted to do, because you want to talk about laws and standards. Your hair has to be cut a certain way. You couldn't have facial hair. You couldn't do all this other kind of stuff, which I'd just done for 2 years as a missionary, where I had to abide to all these standards. It's like, I'm 21 years old now. I want to let my hair down. I want to be free. I want to go appreciate things. But I made the decision to go out there, and it really shaped my life, because that's where I ended up ultimately meeting my wife and creating a family and everything else. But I signed up for this EMT class because I was like, that looks like something I could do. I don't want to sit behind a desk. I don't want to be in an office. And the paramedic program at the time was actually kind of on my radar when I was in EMT school, because the way they formatted the program, if there was people in the paramedic side of things, they would be the lab proctors for the class the year or two behind them. So they would be doing the checkoff sheets, which was a great model because it set them up for success when it came time to take your national registry and that kind of stuff, because you were used to the checkoff sheets and knew all the steps because you were checking off everybody else. So I went to EMT school, came home after that semester after I got my EMT, wasn't really working as an EMT, needed to get some money. So I worked for a private ambulance service. And at the time, because I didn't have my certifications, they put me on a convalescent wheelchair van. Unfortunately, that service also did body recoveries. for the local agency. So here I am, newly EMT, driving a wheelchair van by myself, waiting on my next take somebody to the doctor's office call, and they're like, hey, we don't have anybody available, and we need you to swing by headquarters and pick up a body bag and go out to the lake. There's a body out there that needs to be picked up. So in Michigan on a hot summer day, my first exposure to a dead body. Somebody that had taken a rifle and taken their own life. Something I wasn't prepared for. I remember everything about that call, the smells, the feels, the picking up the eyeballs and the brains, making sure I didn't miss a body part on the beach. Everything made it back in the bag, and then took it to the ME, and hour later, taking somebody to their doctor's appointment. And that was it. Nothing else thought about. Did not deter me or defray me. I don't even think I knew how to process it at that point. It was just something that I had to do for work. But that's my earliest exposure into the EMT world. And after that, I came back, decided to enroll in the paramedic program. And it was a pretty progressive program. It was out in Idaho, so it had all those nature parts to it as well. So we actually did, part of the program was winter camping or high angle rescues. We did a lot of search and rescue and water work. And for a paramedic program, every Thursday was lab days. So they actually they supplemented the local ambulance company and helped out and kind of volunteered to run on calls. So you'd be in the middle of a college class and your radio would go off and you'd get up and go respond to calls as part of the program. But it was one of those kind of isolated little groups, kind of like when you're in a team, you're focused on that team. So my college experience was in a little room, paramedic room above the gym at the Health and Sciences Center. So I didn't get to experience all that because there was so much time and energy into doing the clinical side of things and everything else. So my college exposure was to a very small group of people that were in the same paramedic program as me. And once again, I'm not an intellectual, real smart guy. Things don't come easy. Education type stuff is I didn't get good learning habits in high school, and I was still an A/B student just because I didn't need to study the stuff. If there was a term paper, I'd be doing it the night before, having mom type it up on the typewriter for me so I could turn it in the next day. And I couldn't get away with that as much in paramedic school. So in true firefighter, first responder form, the hands-on stuff, as long as I was learning it hands-on, I was great with it. Mm-hmm. But if it was reading it out of a book, when it came time to take a test, I was not the best at it. I mean, I remember my first EKG cardiac class, looking at the strip, and it was a bunch of squiggly lines till one day it just finally clicked. And that's kind of where paramedic school went, and came home, and my wife that I met out at college was from the Atlanta area. My paramedic program did 2 internships to become a paramedic. You had to do your first ride-along internship was 300 hours of ride-along. So my first exposure to riding along on an ambulance was downtown Atlanta on Grady Ambulance and everything that comes along with that. And that's where I really started focusing on that, connecting. I mean, being the only white guy down in the hood in the middle of nowhere, walking into a crack house and stepping over bodies to get to the patient. And to watch the experienced EMTs and paramedics that were probably burnt out at the time anyways, but they were precepting some spud from Idaho on a ride-along internship, let me handle the patient. And I was able to connect, even though it was a tooth pain on somebody that was cracked out of their mind, to be able to connect because he wouldn't connect to the people that were already burnt out, but because I was showing that unjaded human side of things that I hadn't been experienced to burnout yet, I was able to connect and get that patient to where they needed to go. And that's where I really started learning. And then finished up the rest of my class. On my final internship was 480 hours with DeKalb EMS, who at the time was kind of one of the premier services. So I was working part-time in an ambulance as an EMT while I was doing my ride-alongs as a paramedic. How all too often it happens. So turning the hours and hours away from home. I had a new baby at home, and I was spending part-time on doing my clinicals, full-time on an ambulance, where the preceptor on the ambulance that I was doing interning at trusted me more than her partner because her partner was a new partner. So I was giving directions to the hospital or running codes and stuff, and she wouldn't even let her partner do that, just due to the level of experience that I had as a paramedic. So, and the same thing, even as probably the statute of limitations is passed at this point, but I was employed as an EMT on the ambulance at the time, but my paramedic partners would let me ride in the back with calls that were ALS calls because I had the skill set. I just didn't have and it was a great experience to be trusted in those kind of incidents. So, and then the agency I was working, the area I was working, I learned very quickly that private ambulances are not the most stable thing for a family because they change a lot. The patches and the trucks change, but the people stay the same. So I was like, there's something wrong here, and saw the value in the brotherhood of the fire service. And that's when I got hired on in the agency that I've been employed at my whole career. 25 and a half years I've been there.
I was a straight C student in school. And it's funny because when I got to the fire academy, it was pretty much straight A's, and then the same with EMT and ultimately paramedic school. With you having that more didactic way of learning, how did you do academically in the fire side?
I think I did pretty good. Once again, I'm a hands-on learner, and the fire service is all hands-on kind of stuff. So when it came to check sheets and that kind of stuff, as long as you memorized the check sheet, you could get through it. And I put a lot of time, effort, and energy into something that I really enjoyed doing it. I was a prankster, jokester. So as a young rookie recruit, we had a lot of fun back before HR got to be what HR is nowadays. So
yeah, there's hazing and there's firehouse humor, and those are two very different things. Like if it's coming from a place of nastiness, it's hazing.
Yes, yeah, 100%.
But, if you're ending up covered in water and then flour, and then feathers.
It was a slower agency at times, so the sleep deprivation wasn't necessarily from running calls. It was bunk room shenanigans, probably.
So when you reflect back now, we'll get to kind of like the mental health kind of roller coaster, but what was some of what we'd call career calls that you had over those kind of couple of decades?
Well, that's a lot of years to go back. Mental fog and sleep deprivation. I remember one of the calls, so a Sentinel call I'd been on a couple years, and there was a car wreck that involved two cars that were traveling northbound on the highway in a caravan, and then a drunk driver came southbound in the northbound lanes, got on the exit. And it was at the north end of our city, our territory, and the car overturned. And there were a bunch of kids that went bowling and were coming home, and one of the cars overturned and had 3 or 4 kids in it, and the car was on fire. And at the time I was riding battalion aid. We don't have battalion aids now, but I was driving the battalion, and everybody else was tending to the fire with the kids in it, and 2 of them ultimately perished. But it was up to me while everyone else was dealing with the scene. I was a half mile down the road dealing with a wrong way driver. And she was in some pretty bad shape, broken pelvis, some other stuff. And I remember tending to her, even though she'd just caused all this trauma and bad things to these unsuspecting kids. And I was able to render care to her. Somehow, I don't know how I did it. I was behind her holding C-spine with my elbows, and I was able to pull her arm up on the steering wheel and start an IV from behind her and do everything I needed to do. And she ended up getting transported. I'm sure there was jail time and all that other kind of stuff after the fact. But that's not really stuck with me. It stuck with me the being called in the next day for a critical incident stress debriefing, my first time experiencing that. And I remember some seasoned chiefs. So at the time we were just transitioning from a combination volunteer, part-time, full-time department to full-time all the way across the board. And a lot of our fire marshals at the time were, they worked at another agency, and they worked part-time in the fire marshal's office. But one of the chiefs in there, he was a paramedic as well, and he was on that call with us. And I remember looking across the table at him, and he was in absolute tears, like sobbing, and I couldn't understand why. Turns out he had kids that age of the kids that perished in the car. Here I am, a young firefighter with babies. I couldn't relate to anything. I was like, is there something wrong with me? Because this call isn't affecting me like it's affecting him. And looking back on that, I understand it now. why the calls that we run affect us, because they're directly related to what we have going on in our personal lives.
Yeah, the one I wrote about it in One More Light, and it kind of actually refers to it even in Kinder, but the 3-year-old I had killed when my son was about 2 is the only one I've really, I remember it shaking me on scene. Again, not to the point where it would affect our ability to do, but it was a DOA. I mean, she was decapitated basically. So, but it became a body recovery. And I've said this a few times, when we were supposed to go back, this is real leadership. My captain told me and my partner, I'm DFOing you to stay in the station. He said, we're about to retire. Him and the engineer were close to the end. They said, you do not need to add this to the encyclopedia of things that you're going to see in your career. This is a body recovery. You're not saving anyone. And I remember then we were kind of almost like butthurt, like, they don't think that we can handle it kind of thing. But then you reflect back and like, what incredible leadership.
100%.
If you don't need to witness something horrific in the fire service, then you shouldn't. Like your officers or the medic, lead medic, whatever it is, I'll go run a strip. I'll go see whatever it is. Stay back. You don't need this in your mind. But that one is the only one I've ever had it wasn't even a flashback so much, but I was at Disney and this little girl, the engine had covered her with a blanket. And it was obviously a weird kind of silhouette because the head was missing. But she had, sneakers on and long socks and all that stuff. And then we were at Disney years later and it was a hot day. So someone had a blanket over the stroller, in this case, to protect them for the sun, but it was the same kind of little legs. And I just had this adrenaline rush. And I told Becky, I'm like, I just need to sit down for a second.
Yeah.
And I was good after, catching my breath and everything, but I was like, fuck, man. If this is what people experience all the time that are really deep in this and get 100%. The flashbacks. But again, that was because at that time, my son was the same age, and I used to have the seat on the side. And after that day, I moved the seat to the middle. Much harder to get your kid in and out. I didn't care. It gives him, maybe 1.5 foot more chance of recovering if he gets hit on either side. But it does. I mean, how can it not affect you? And even on the other side, I've had people that had to work their father, their grandfather, and then they go and run, as you mentioned, the numerous elderly. We forget about that too. It's not just the kids.
Right.
It's 100%. Something that relates you back to your own life that can be detrimental too.
And it changes from time to time. What's going to affect you 5 years in is going to affect you different 25 years in. So, absolutely.
Well, going back to having the compassion that you had in the crack house with the the tooth pain reminds me of one of the stories I wrote about in One More Light, where my very first department, it was a man down. I'll never forget this. I was brand new, kind of proby, and there was like groans in the station. And I was like, oh, that's weird. Anyway, we get on the rig, we get there, and there's some, cops already standing around this guy who's lying on the sidewalk. And we get out, and they just kind of join the circle, and this one female cop starts kicking, it probably has already, and is kicking this guy, hey, buddy, get up. And I'm looking at them going, well, I'm going to do something. So I just go to the guy and obviously check, make sure he's breathing, and then, ultimately look through his pockets. And, he's intoxicated, alcohol, but I find a piece of paper and it's a drug test result. And he's just found out he's HIV positive. And I'm like, well, what would you do if you found that out? There's probably a good chance that you might open a bottle and drown your sorrows and try and process this.
Right.
And I remember just thinking, we're supposed to be this kind, compassionate, servant, service-oriented profession. How did these people get to this point? There's another one. I remember it was a stroke. Elderly lady had a stroke, and the medic is like making fun of her chin hair while we're pushing her, to the ambulance. And I'm again like, what the fuck is this?
Right.
But then I realize now, obviously we know this is compassion fatigue. Yeah. You seem to have such a loving heart, though. Were you able to retain that compassion even when you started going through your own stuff?
I believe so, because I could pour my time and energy into those calls. So at work, I believe so. I think the area I suffered the most was actually at home, where I didn't have the compassion at home that I needed to have, because they, speaking of my family, didn't understand what I'd just been through. And all too often, as we do as firefighters, we want to protect them from the maladies that we see, from the abhorrent things that we see about society, and we don't want them to see and understand that. So I remember a common phrase when I'd get home and I'd be super tired is, my wife would say, "Are you doing okay?" And my response was always, "I'm just tired."
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't necessarily physically tired. It was mentally, emotionally, spiritually tired. I'm just tired of dealing with this crap. And understandably so, I'd been away from the house for 24, 48 hours because I'm one of those firefighters that didn't work one fire department. I also worked part-time at another fire department. So there's 48 hours that I'm at home that when I get home on my one off day, all she wants is a break from the kids and dealing with all this other kind of stuff. And I'm pissy because I'd just been up running calls or I'd seen this or done that. And I'm coming home to a dirty house where I like order, where at the firehouse after dinner, everybody gets off, cleans the table off, wipes everything down, does the dishes. And at my house, when I'm at home, we get up and there's dishes left on the table, the sink's full, the trash isn't taken out, all this other kind of stuff. And all I want is some order. And I didn't have the compassion and understanding for my family at the time.
So let's kind of walk through that. You said even the entry to this, with some of the horrific stuff as an EMT and then a medic, and then, your early years in the fire service. And now you've got this compounding element, that 48 is another thing that we do, whether it's within the same agency and it's mandatory overtime, it's voluntary overtime. When you kind of look at the timeline, what was that kind of downward spiral, and then where was your lowest place?
I felt valued at work, and not that I didn't feel valued at home, but I was comfortable at work. I was comfortable at work, and I was good at it. I mean, there was a time I was working full-time at one department, part-time at another, helping with all the training classes, and I was a SWAT medic on the SWAT team. So I was putting in a lot of hours, and I have a lot of value for that part-time department that I was at, because at the time there was all these Metro Atlanta firefighters working at this part-time department that were battalion chiefs and captains and had all the skill set that they learned from their full-time jobs that I was literally learning on the job as an internship, essentially getting paid for, where I was riding C8 and they were sitting in the back because they were tired from running all the calls at their full-time agencies. So career-wise, it was the best time in my career. Home-wise, it directly affected the relationship, especially with my two youngest children. That just 2 days ago, my daughter flew out to go out west to try to find herself for the third time. And before she left, she's like, "Do you want to hug, Dad?" I said, "Honey, that's up to you. These are the decisions you're making, and that's up to you." And she turned around and walked out. Because we'd been the safe place. She can always come back home. But there's a point where you want to make your decisions and include your friends and put everything on social media, but we're not discussing it as a family. We're here to help you. When you're ready, we're ready. And haven't talked to her since. It's affected my relationship. Like I said, my son has autism. There was many times when he was going through his struggles where he was good at school the whole time, kind of like you talked about with Ty. He coped and was okay until he finally said, "I'm not okay." And he has an outburst, and look where it got him. Same thing with my son. He'd be good at school, but when he came home, that's when the blevy happened. Pop-off valve was working great at school, but when he got home, he was comfortable and things could release. And he was having some depression, anxiety, pulling his hair out, and I couldn't talk to Caleb. I would have to say something to my wife so that she could translate it, whatever Dad was trying to say to him, because we did not speak the same language. And I think that's directly attributed to all the time I spent at work in that time as they were adolescent dealing with their own issues.
What was that draw to stay, to whether it was overtime in your department, whether it was to work on the other one? Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously finances are always going to be a thing, but when we actually break it apart, I think a lot of times, there's all equally an opposite. There's ways of living more within means that will offset that. What do you think was that pull that kept you in uniform longer than you needed to be?
I think it boils down to my childhood and growing up. My dad was a teacher. He spent a lot of time at school, probably a little bit extra after school to grade papers, but he poured into the kids at school just as much as well. I mean, that's why he got out of being an educator, because it was the time of the crack babies where it was always it was always the teacher's fault, not the parents' fault. So he likes order. So mom stayed at home and raised us. Family of 10. There's not enough daycare out there for 10 kids.
Not enough money either for 10 kids.
Yeah. So you have built-in babysitters with the older kids and everything else, which it was fine. But mom was always in the home. So I looked at it that way as well. If I can be out being the breadwinner, at least my wife is at home and she's raising them with our values and everything that we believe in, and not sending them out to daycares and all this other kind of stuff to have somebody else raise our kids. So it was those opportunities that were there that I was able to capitalize on.
I love that phrase, we did the best with what we had. And I think that kind of takes some of the blame off the way we were raised and going further back. Because that's true. You know, the environment now, this conversation that we're having, you and I wouldn't have even had 15 years ago.
Right.
We wouldn't be able to. But now, I mean, this is something I've talked about a lot with, again, the work week. You know, my whole fire service career, every single union negotiation has been about money, and usually a pretty small amount, like a 50-cent raise, dollar raise, whatever it is. But what I'm realizing now is the ultimate currency is time with our family. If you could go back in time, not guilt, regret, shame, because that was then and this is now, what would you do differently?
Probably if I would have worked a second job, it wouldn't have been in another fire department.
Yeah, because there's other ways of making money, and this is what we forget. And I think this is the other thing, even with the overtime, if it's an understaffed department, just because it's not mandatory, there's an underlying element of guilt that if I don't take that, someone's going to get forced. So a lot of the air quotes voluntary overtime is really mandatory,
100%.
But we're just nice people and we don't want, the firefighter that just had a kid to get hit and he's on the bubble, so you take it for him.
Yeah, we had something happen at the firehouse just last shift I worked before I came down here. One of the guys, we've got a newer, like a 2-year guy that's been with us. He's been at my station just a couple weeks to work on some task book type stuff. But it was after dinner time and we were all kind of sitting there talking, and he was out in the bay FaceTime with his family. He came in with the biggest smile on his face with his baby son on FaceTime. He said, "Guys, my son just took his first steps." It jaded me, slips out of my mouth, "Welcome to the fire service." Because you're witnessing your child taking its first steps over FaceTime because you're at a firehouse.
Yeah. And that could also happen because you're an accountant.
Right.
And it happened at 3 in the afternoon. But
that's right where my mind went. Even though I've got all the tools and everything that I've done, I was like...
But again, that's a very loud voice, because really the truth is you were away from your family way more than you should have been. So the chances of you seeing that firsthand in person are greatly diminished when you're working 56 hours and now you've got mandatory, or, you've got a distorted belief that you'll add value to your career by working in a second department too, but this is the reality. I tell people, like, how many first steps have you missed? How many donuts with dads? How many ballet recitals or high school award ceremonies or whatever it is? When they've looked out in the audience, and trust me, I was the kid looking out in the audience and my dad wasn't there, and we're not there. And we're like, but we're on a mission to save the world and it's important. It's like, yeah, but those are the people that it's most important to. Because we all know that if Mark or James aren't in the station that day, another body's going to fill the seat. You're not that important.
100%.
But to your children, you're everything.
The world won't stop spinning.
So on that journey then, so you obviously there seems to be a lot of, guilt and shame about the home side. Where was that lowest point, if any, like, pivotal point? And let's talk about, what you started trying to do to address that.
I think biggest thing overall, I don't think there's one specific incident I could put my fingers on. I think just the tiredness and there came a point where I felt like I would be more worth to my family if I were to die at work or on my way home or anything like that, because of the financial and all the insurance and everything else, that I'd be more value to my family than what I'm giving them right now.
Did you feel like a burden at that point? Did you feel in any way, shape or form that you were the reason for some of the suffering? The reason I ask that is I hear that from so many people that have been at that point, that little voice is whispering in their ear.
I did. I think it got to the point where my kids are behaving this way or going through these things because I'm not present. I'm not there. My relationship with my wife wasn't the best at the time. I mean, this year we'll hit 30 years of marriage, which is a total anomaly in the fire service. I'm not saying it's been all butterflies and rainbows and unicorns and everything else. But she was going through her stressors at the time. I was going through my stressors. I'm like, I'm probably worth more to her as a bank account than I am emotionally and spiritually at this point. I'm not there to support her and all this other kind of stuff. And I'm not the man she married 30 years ago. To say that this job doesn't affect us is like saying you can walk through a shower and not get wet. And it's not that it affects us in a bad way. So it changes who we are. And unless we continue to change our viewpoints and our perspectives, it's working out, for example. Just because I used to find a lot of solace in going to the gym. I coached CrossFit. So I'd be at the gym once again, working 48 hours. I'd get off shift, my one day off. I'd wake up, be at the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning, teach the 5 a.m., 6 a.m. class, work out between 7 and 9:30 when the 9:30 class started, work out again between the 10:30 and 12 o'clock when the 12 o'clock, because I'd feel like I need to punish myself to beat myself into a puddle of goo in the corner, sweat, crying, everything that a CrossFit workout does.
Get it all out.
Mm-hmm. I thought I was decompressing, and it was doing total opposite. It was throwing my cortisol levels off. It was throwing everything off, where when it came time to perform on the job, on trainings, or I didn't have the energy or the capability to perform to do my job, which I thought I was preparing by working out, when I was emptying my tank is what I was doing, quite literally.
I had Jeff Nichols on. Just had him on again with Catherine, his wife, recently. I haven't put it out yet, but I'll never forget in the interview he was saying, basically kind of alluding to that. You got these people that go and kill themselves in the gym, after, you think he was talking about us. You've just done a 24-hour shift.
Right.
And it hit me. I'm like, that's me. He goes, think about it. You come off exhausted, your stress levels are through the roof, and you're like, well, how am I going to deregulate my nervous system? Let me go do Murph. That'll do it. Mm-hmm. He's like, think stress plus stress does not equal less stress.
Right.
Now, yes, a deload kind of, slow row or a swim or a walk or something, absolutely. And I'll never forget, there was a workout. It wasn't that long after this. I think it was with that whole thing with Ty. So I was like borderline fucking homicidal by that point. Not actually, but
Yeah, no, definitely.
Fucking hair trigger. And it was some sort of CrossFit workout where it was snatches. And I just couldn't get the bar over my head. And I dropped the weights, walked out the gym, and just went for a slow mile run. Mm-hmm. By the time I got back, I felt better. But the complexity of an Olympic lift couldn't have been further from what I actually needed. It just added frustration.
Right.
So when I realized like, oh yeah, sweating it out isn't really a thing. Like if you come home and you're exhausted, what is a low intensity thing you can do, and how can you down regulate and do a new calm session or a headspace meditation and get to bed early? That is so much more important than, I'm just going to do Fran and then throw up in the toilet, because It doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. That's pretty powerful. So that was my initial way to try to cope with things. When I found that didn't work, I kind of connected with, that's about the time I connected with Rick George and everything that Rick does with his embracing the island of the misfit toys. Rick's superpower is his own personal journey, and I know he shared it in the past, but he's used that for the greater good of the power when it comes to vulnerability and authenticity, to share your own journey and not for the sake of comparing trauma trophies, but of, hey, this is what I've been through and I've come out on the other side, and it's not always ideal. Even though I've got all these tools in my toolbox now, it doesn't mean they work every time I need them. I may have to seek out something else. So I'd been helping one of our friends that he was an officer in our department, ended up going to Shatterproof because of some of his own personal struggles. And he'd connected with Rick through that. And Rick was teaching a class up at MAFC, Metro Atlanta Firefighter Conference in Atlanta that's up there. And this guy was going to help Rick out. I said, hey, I wouldn't mind coming down to help with the class. Well, as usually happens with those people that have substance use issues or deal with their own demons, they're not the most reliable when it comes to those situations. That guy wasn't able to make it, but I still went down there. And that's when I got into some pretty cool relationships with the Tactical Resiliency Training and the team, and was able to connect with a bunch of, I'm not even going to say broken individuals anymore. I heard a quote the other day, and I don't remember who said it. I'm not trying to plagiarize anything. I listen to a lot of podcasts and read a lot of books, but he said, buried, not broken. Mm-hmm. And I know you've talked about the legend of the seed, where they planted us in a dark place and thought,
they tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that buried really hit home for me, to see other people that have been through their own personal struggles and are the outcast of their departments, or been through things and are no longer working for those departments, to be able to give tools of resiliency to people that are pre-planned or pre-incident, not post-incident. To teach the breathing techniques, the yoga, the mindfulness, the things that we can use when the wheels start coming off, when we're alone in that dark building with all that smoke and our own thoughts, listening to our own breathing, will the walls start closing in. Had some of my own personal mass confidence issues just because of everything that I was going through. And it took a lot of time on a treadmill with a face piece and a blast mask to get over those. And it's still not ideal. There are still times where I go there, but luckily I have the tools in my toolbox now to overcome those things. And that's where I got introduced into yoga for first responders. And Eric and Olivia are some of the most powerful, genuine people that are out there that do things for the right reasons. And another group of people that saw value in me when I didn't see it in myself. Eric, they teach instructor schools. Eric wasn't able to be there for his because of his full-time job. And he said, dude, you're pretty comfortable in front of a classroom. We do a cultural competency side because we have yoga instructors in this class that don't know anything about the fire service. He said, do you mind come teaching the cultural competent part for this class? You can take the instructor school while you're there. You'll just teach this 1 hour of the class. And I was hooked immediately. The only yoga I'd done before then is the 1.5-hour tape of Taibo yoga or whatever it was. Or
Billy Banks
or whatever it was. I don't even remember, but I know I'd never finished the DVD because it was so long. And that took me to some pretty dark places. The issues are in the tissues. And I remember holding a low squat, horse position is what they call it, and having such an emotional release from all the tension and everything that I was holding in my connective tissues and my hips. And the power that was in that, being mindful, being on the mat, being able to work through those things and realizing that was part of the process. It's not stretching. It's processing stress. It's building resilience. It's enhancing performance. And the power that comes through the breath work of breathing into those areas was a huge game changer for me. And I still continue to be able to share that mission with a lot of people with Eric and Olivia with Yoga for First Responders. So
yeah, they're amazing. Actually, I've just flashed back then. Olivia and I did a Facebook Live. I did one with Eric Goodman, and we did a foundation. This is during COVID, so everyone's in their house. So we did a full foundation training kind of workout, Facebook Live for everyone to join along. And then Olivia did a yoga one time as well. But I mean, it just makes so much sense. And it's funny with the whole, the body keeps the score and, what they're doing with that. I had Rob Safoli on, who's FDNY fitness trainer, but they've got a thing that he was exposed to called TRE, trauma release exercises.
Okay, yeah.
And it's the same kind of thing. You do these kind of pulsing movements.
Right.
And then you get these tremors that you
Right.
can't stop. And again, it's a
It's
huge
all physiological.
release.
That's what happens. Nature is savage, and that's what happens after the gazelle is chased by the lion. They go into
that shiver.
that shiver.
Yeah, 100%. And this is I talk about this all the time now.
Yeah.
This is what's so fucking exciting and the frustrating at the same time is now, like, again, you and I sit across,
Right.
like, we're going through this and this. We'd be like, well, I don't know. How do you fix that? You know, what is mental health? Now we're sitting here and I've got over 1,000 people on the show, almost 1,100 now. Each one of those has a solution for something, whether it's their own personal story people connect with, whether it's, you know, the things that they've created that are helping. But there are so many tools in the toolbox now, and we'll get to some of the other ones that you use in your mental health journey in a minute, but it's so much more vast than people realize. And understanding as well that if you're just talking about the mind and you go into counseling and you're doing nothing physically, well, there's a disconnection there too. You know, healthy body, healthy mind, and vice versa. So if what you're doing doesn't include some sort of movement practice and working on your breath, you're missing pieces of these jigsaw puzzles that's going to give you that overall holistic kind of healing journey that you need.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the thing. There's no one magic pill. And I know we've talked about that. Just because I've got all these tools, you know what? I might not be in the right headspace to try to be mindful at this point. Mm-hmm. I may need to go exercise or do something like that. Or, you know what? Yoga's not doing poses on a mat. Yoga's all about the breath work is what it boils down to. So as long as you're focusing on that breath work, you can do yoga sitting in a chair. You can be mindful. You can take 30 seconds to do some breath work before you go inside. You're doing yoga.
Yeah. That's how I see walking my dog. I leave my phone at home. My mind was busy, but I'll try and focus on her, my breath.
Right.
You know, again, tapping into nature is a big thing with me and hawks. I don't know what it is, but I loved them when I was young, kestrels. But it was we didn't really have any around us. It was a TV film. But I've always had this thing about hawks. And where I live now, there's one I call Stephen Hawking. There's lots of them, of course. But, you know, Steve will show up when I'm thinking about things. That and the blooming number 343 all the time, everywhere. But but just back to the point, you can have what they call moving meditation.
Right.
You know, whether you're just hiking through a forest, whether you're walking your dog, you know, you can sit in traffic and do breath work and straighten your spine. You know, so there's so many opportunities to just take those little micro moments to tap back into being present.
Yeah, and as part of that yoga for first responders instructor school, you've got to come back and before you get your certification, it's probably one of the most intense courses I've taken in my fire service career, the in-person and the online side of things. It was a 5 or 6 days of 12 to 14 hours every day doing yoga and learning the science behind it and everything else. It was super intense. But as part of the certification process, you got to come back and teach some classes. So, of course, me being a station captain, I was like, guys, guess what? I got to do this. You're my guinea pigs. Mm-hmm. And the first day we did it, they were all in. Afterwards, they're both falling asleep on the yoga mat and everything because they're so relaxed, recovered, whatever you want to call it. And the next shift, they come up to me and, you know, the first thing that always comes up is, what's for dinner? One of them came up to me and said, hey, Cap, can we do that yoga stuff again today? It took one session for them to realize the value of it, to understand it.
100%. Well, so that's, you know, you're accumulating these tools now. When we sat down, I remember even thinking, because we've talked before, you know, you come to the house, we talked on the phone, that there seemed to be a maelstrom in your mind at that point. So when we talked
100%.
and you said what you were doing and then you'd been through some healing modalities and like, well, then now is the time to talk.
Right.
But so talk to me about prior to the SIREN Project, where had you found yourself and was there a sense that there was something else that you were missing?
For sure. Once again, I had all these tools and I was like, all right, this one's not working this time. This one's not working. This one's not working. I guess it's time to make a trip to Harbor Freight and buy whatever's next on the shelf. And like I said, I listened to podcasts, so I heard you talking to Angela on your podcast, and it's crazy. Right away, I went into doing some research, and I'd listened to a couple other podcasts of special operators, Sean Ryan show, some other things, and was intrigued by, once again, the natural side of things that often are referred to as alternative medicines when they're the original medicines. And kind of did some research and reached out, and then learned more about the program, and was able to make connections and contacts, and it's becoming pretty popular. So a couple months went by and didn't hear anything back, and then heard that they had some openings on one of their wellness retreats. And from day one, I was blown away by the preparation side of things, that it's not just showing up and doing the retreat, but it's also what you do before to prepare yourself for your vessel. Cut out caffeine, you cut out all the inflammatory things that we put into our bodies to prepare your vessel to be ready to receive whatever healing it needs to receive. And then you go on the retreat, and there's huge support on the retreat. There's medical support, there's drug screenings, there's all kinds of stuff. There's group counseling and therapy, there's individual counseling and therapy, and there's many things that happen on those retreats. It's not just going to the jungle to get healed. And it was a very powerful experience for me. But the thing that impressed me as well is they also include the integration side of things and the supporters of all that. So the discussion I had with my wife is like, hey, I'm going to go do this thing. And after the fact, there is power in a pilgrimage to find yourself. We talk about all the religions, and there's certain religions that say go to Mecca. That's their one thing in their life, is to make it to Mecca and to do this worship and whatever it takes to get there. And I think there's powerful, that pilgrimage. I had it when I did my missionary work in Chile and South America, that led me to some healing and some tools in my toolbox. And I was able to go with the SIREN Project to one of their retreats, and the healing that happened there was very, very impactful. It gave me not what I wanted, but what I needed. And to get there, the only way to is through. So it was not a pleasant experience. It took me to some pretty dark places. And at one point in one of the sessions, as I was struggling in some of those dark places, Andrea Lucy, who she would be phenomenal to get on the podcast. When I was there, I asked her, I said, Andrea, have you ever done podcasts? And she's like, no, I'm not a fan of them, because I don't see myself as a subject matter expert when it comes to this kind of stuff. And she pulled me out of that point, and she said, where's your hang up? And I said, there's just so much darkness, so much pain and darkness. I don't feel worthy of the positive feelings. I haven't felt for so many years. I don't want to feel again, because I'm afraid it's going to be overwhelming, that I won't know how to respond to it, and I won't know how to handle it. She told me, you're doing the right thing then. You're doing what you have to. And I remember Tim, after one of the other sessions, looked at me, he said, dude, he said, you're a fighter. And I looked at him and gave him a hug. I said, yeah, that's the problem. I don't know how to surrender.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that we did on those retreats opened the door and the windows to me to not be super zen and everything's hunky-dory and everything's beautiful, but it allowed me a lot of self-awareness to know that this is happening and I feel this way and this is why it's happening that way, and it's all part of the process. And I was able to connect a lot of people that were at that retreat. They were all firefighters that were there at the time, and some of your former guests, and there's some of your guests that you had on the past that are getting ready to do their own journey as well. And it's been cool to kind of commiserate with them, because once again, it was not a pleasant experience for me, but to have others there witness the things that I go through and reassure me that I'm worth it. And one of those people that from my past, a call I ran at one of my departments, her name was impressed upon my head. And I try to be very mindful of if somebody's name or presence is impressed upon my name or my heart, and make it a point to text them or reach out to them. Hey, I'm thinking of you. And that's all it takes, is to reach out. And so once again, I'd run calls on her husband. He since passed, and I was there in kind of a moral support afterwards, and she owns her own business. So I stopped by her business just on a whim, got out of training early, went down, went in and talked to her. And then we spend the next 2 hours talking about struggles she's having, struggles her daughter's having, the retreat I went on, and some of the healing factors that went on in that. And just to be able to connect, I said, you know what? Give your daughter my number. She's struggling. Have her give me a call. I'm trained in peer support stuff. I know she's not a firefighter, but I'm at a place and perspective where I can share healing with other people at this point. She said, no, you know what? When she comes back to town, I want you to meet her, because you can't get the full Marc experience just talking on the phone. You have to be in present. And that's the power of presence to me. That's not that I'm perfect at it or I do everything good. You know what? I probably got more of a hair trigger now since my retreat than I did beforehand, because I don't have time for the BS anymore. Don't tell me the fluff. Tell me what the problem is and how we're going to fix it, and we'll get on to things.
You know, I can relate to that, right?
Yeah. Don't tell me the BS, because you can't BS a BSer. And that's in the fire service and public safety. All too often, we see the curtains and the man behind the curtain that administration tries to pull in front of us. Don't treat us like we're stupid. We know what's going on, and we understand what's going on. Just tell us what's going on.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, goes back to what we were saying earlier.
Right.
It's about caring. You know, don't say that you care as you stand there at the lectern at a funeral and no one's seen you in the station for 5 years, and then go back to doing everything the same way.
Right.
One thing that I've heard from a lot of people that have had so much success with the kind of holistic plant medicine, journeys is, like you said, there's no such thing, there is no magic bullet, magic pill. And from, other pharmaceutical routes, so let's say MDMA or
right.
ketamine,
mm-hmm.
where there's really success. Take MDMA, for example. It's not something that people give you and you go away and take it. You sit down with a therapist
right.
and you take MDMA, and it, allows you to kind of drop the guard and access some of these boxes. And obviously ketamine is more of a kind of psychedelic element as well, and you're going to have even deeper journeys.
Right.
But I've had people that on the show and they said, well, I tried ketamine. What happened is they were infused and then the person walked away. So the proverbial closet door was open, but no one was there to help them actually sort through what they found. What is your perspective with this unique, route that you ended up taking as far as what's next?
It's truly about set and setting. It's really not about the destination. It's about the journey, because it's changed my mindset. One of the things I brought back from my retreat that we started doing at the firehouse is a gratitude practice. So every meal on the retreat, we would share 3 things that we were grateful for. So of course, naturally, I was like, this is kind of pretty cool. And it helps me. It's kind of hokey. It's kind of kumbaya, hold our hands, stand in a circle type thing. So I started doing it, instituting it. It's like at the dinner table. You know what happens at the firehouse dinner table? It's where we solve the world's problems and where we bust each other's chops. But I came back from this retreat. I was like, hey, we did this on the retreat and I really liked it. So I'd appreciate it if you guys would do this with me. I'll start. Because even with all the leadership classes that we take or the focus on leadership, it's what you practice. It's the walk that you walk that people are going to. So unless you show your own vulnerability and authenticity first, others aren't going to buy into it. So I shared my gratitude, 3 things that I'm grateful for. And then we went around the table and everybody did it. And of course, at first it was the eye roll. Oh, whatever, Cap, we're going to do this. Okay, whatever. But at that dinner table, I've got seasoned, salty guys that are getting ready to retire in 200 days. I got the guys that have been on the job for 2 years, a year. I've got a battalion chief that's been there for 30 plus years. We're all sharing what we're grateful and thankful for from different perspectives. And by about the 3rd or 4th time doing this, one of my drivers shared that I'm grateful for my wife and my marriage and my relationship and where we are. A year and a half ago, I wouldn't think I was still be married, but I am. And it was powerful to share from that vulnerable place where even though we're still going to bust each other's chops, that there was still enough connection in that group to be able to share what's actually going on in your life, and not just the shit times, but the good times as well. I was in a bad space. I'm in a good space now. It's like the experience from the 1950s with the rats on Hope. They put these rats in a big thing of water to see how long it would take him to drown. And after 10, 15 minutes, the rats started sinking and they let him drown to a point where they pulled the rats out, revived them, dried them off. They'd been saved. They put the rats back in the water. 60 hours went by. The rat was still swimming in the water because he had hope that somebody was going to get him out of the shit. Because it had happened before. They'd been to a dark place. They started drowning. Somebody saved them. So when we provide that hope, that care, that understanding that I've been there, and there's light on the other side, one more light, there's power in that.
It reminds me of that other proverb where the man's stuck in the hole and the doctor walks by and they shout, "Doctor, doctor, can you help me?" And he writes a prescription and throws it down the hole. And then I think a preacher comes by and then they throw down a Bible or, a Quran or whatever book would be. And then the third time someone comes by and he's like, "Please, please, can you help me?" And the guy jumps in the hole. And he goes, "What are you doing?" I said, I forget exactly what the preface is. And he goes, "Well, how are you going to be able to help me?" He goes, "Because I've been here before. I know how to get out." And that's just it. And again, that hand that's reaching down to the rat, that's someone who has become that beacon of light. And this post-traumatic growth, the ability, and you mentioned it before we hit record, when you've been through some of these healing journeys and your men and women know what you've been through, and now they're coming out of the woodwork saying, "I'm hurting too." And the crazy thing is, if you look at, especially let's say 10 years ago, we're sitting at a firehouse table now, everyone you look at is just fine to you. And inside, you're feeling the way you're feeling.
Right.
But if you could climb inside the ear holes of so many other ones around the table, you realize that they were struggling too. Mm-hmm. And going back to the compassion, all the things we talked about earlier, what is lost on us, what is lost on law enforcement, the military, corrections, dispatchers even, is especially us. We forget that it was kindness, compassion, and service that sent us into uniform. That is a beautiful, loving, arguably feminine quality that sent us in. And then we get in and we think that we're supposed to be this pseudo-stoic, stone-faced responder that's never fazed by anything, that can, sleep when I'm dead and all this bullshit. But that's what's killing us. Negating the fact that it was actually kindness and compassion that burns in our heart, that put us into this uniform. What we do is a physical action. Going into a second story building, into, VES, a room, or, going over the side of a bridge to rescue someone who's dangling from a car, whatever it is, that's the physical action. And we need to have that, as I've always said. We pull up on some bloody car scene, you can't be queening out going, "Oh my God, there's so much blood." That's not going to do well at that moment. Mm-hmm. So you go into game face and it absolutely has a place. But then after, it's okay to be vulnerable. And the biggest, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was thinking that vulnerability is weakness. Vulnerability is the biggest fucking superpower, the biggest act of courage you can have. And I think that is one... a thing that we can use as a tool for helping other people. You see someone's not doing well, you say, "How you doing?" "Oh, I'm fine." No. How are you really doing? Mm-hmm. And then you start with, "Well, let me tell you about how I was doing recently." And then they're like, "Fuck, I had no idea." Or actually, I've been going through some stuff with my wife, whatever the thing. I lost my dog. Right. And it broke my fucking heart, whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think this is what we've got to remember, is that we are yin and yang. But if we lose that, I always forget, I think it's yin. If we lose that that soft part, the beautiful, kind, compassionate servant element, then you become a white circle. You become RoboCop.
Right.
So tapping back into the very thing that is the nucleus of what it means to be a firefighter, a paramedic, a police officer, that is how I think we start clawing our way back. And having a table full of people that are courageously vulnerable and truly saying, "You know what, I'm not doing well today." and everyone else understanding and saying the right things of support, not pouring on guilt and shame, some facade of, pseudo masculinity. That is, I think, how we're really going to move the needle in this mental health conversation.
100%. And that's what, at this point, and I know we've been going for some time now, at this point, that's what I've learned the most in my journey is the power of being human. Because all too often as first responders, we come really good at compartmentalizing things so that we can do our job. And I feel human again. We ran a pediatric arrest the other day, probably a SIDS death. It ended up transporting the child. And I remember the chaos. We were on scene, and the family was of a different, we've talked about religion and often in ethnicities. This one, the females had the hijab on and everything else, and definitely a different culture, different understanding. But what I appreciate most about the other cultures is they know how to grieve. And ultimately, we transported the child, and I remember being in there, and finally we got some more information that the child had been down longer than we thought. So the doctor was going to make the decision to call it. Well, in the time, mom and dad had showed up, and we're sitting in the hallway outside the trauma room. And doctor's like, I'm going to go tell mom, and then let her come in and see that we're doing everything for the child, and then terminate efforts. So I was standing in the hallway, and the doctor walked out, and he just as cold can be. Ma'am, we've done everything that we can medically. Your son's dead.
Compassion fatigue.
And I stood there and I watched it happen, and it was like someone punched me in the chest. And then I watched the mom and dad go in there, and mom just break down, my baby, you're my boy, you're my boy, you're my baby. And at that point, I look over at the respiratory therapist that's bagging the patient, and the tears automatically start welling up in her eyes. So I walk over to the respiratory therapist. I said, hey, can I take over for you? And she said, yes, please. So, I'm a paramedic. I'm not even a transport paramedic. I'm a firefighter that rode in. But I was able to sit there and take over the bagging of a code that we're going to call anyways to allow a healthcare provider that was viscerally affected by seeing a mother grieve over her child to step on the other side of the curtain and to be able to grieve right away. And after it was called, she came up to me. She said, thank you. And the same thing, I remember mom and dad sitting in that trauma room, grieving over the patient. Everybody else had left. And there was one nurse kind of standing at the door, and parents were standing there grieving. And I was like, I got to go in there and talk to mom. And I walked in and I said, I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. We did everything that we could. I'll be praying for you and your family. And not knowing the rules of engagement for some customs who males shouldn't touch females or whatever, she stood up and she gave me a hug. And we just stood there and embraced. And I was able to have a human moment during a human spiritual time when they were grieving a loved one to show the human side of things. I already did the medical. It didn't work. Anything we were going to do wasn't going to work. And to share that special time and that spiritual moment of that spirit leaving the body, but to be able to support mom and dad in that time is why we do the job. It's why we got into it. To be the care, the compassion, to be the light in the darkness when people are having their hardest time. And after it was done, as I walked out, the nurse mouthed to me, she said, thank you again. To witness the human side of people. And I think that's how we effectuate change. That's how we get over all the BS and the moral injury and everything else is, yes, there are times when it comes to work, but we need to understand when it's time to return to be human.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's the perfect place to wrap it up. I'm going to throw some closing questions at you, but I'm just writing that down because that's going to be the video for this. I mean, just again, love, compassion, kindness, and even going back without taking a deep dive because it's the end of the conversation, but when the work week, when we break down our men and women physically, mentally, and emotionally, we rob them of that ability to feel, whether it's to be compassionate on scene or whether it's to process it after. And it's funny because when you were talking about being out there when the death notification happened, I remember a young guy that was had a brain bleed, just dropped in a kennel, dropping their dog off before they were going to spend a magical weekend in a theme park resort. And I was writing my report, and I'm here, and the door for the grieving room is where that plant is, 10 feet away. And the person walks in to notify, and then there's the wails and the screams, and the code had gone perfectly. Technically, it could not have been a more perfect code. But on the technical side, it didn't change anything. But like you said, what needed to be done now was the emotional side. And, taking care of those people, but also remembering that those screams affect. You talk about guilt, shame,
100%.
Inability to save, when you've done everything right, everything you were trained, and yet they still die. So that human side from the patient and from the responder. And then, what a beautiful example. Looking to your left and realizing that, that one member of your crew, maybe they've got someone that age. Maybe they just had something happen, and you can see something's not quite right. And you tell them, look, when you do me a favor, go to the engine and go do X, Y, and Z, whatever it is. So it all comes back, whether it's what we were talking about, spirituality, or whether it's, the parenting side or on call. The moment we're disconnected from that humanity, that kindness and compassion, that's where the problems start. And I think the answer is beautiful. We just got to tap back into it again and then create an environment that allows us to nurture that rather than break down our men, women, and even children.
100%.
All right. Well, then the first of the closing questions. Is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our conversation today or completely unrelated.
Oh, my goodness. Is there one I don't recommend? There's a lot of good ones out there. One that I've read recently that impacted me was The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. He's done some phenomenal things, but the thing that impacted me about that one is his own vulnerability on his own healing journey. Even though he's a doctor and a psychologist and got all these accolades, he's had his own journey as well. So he shares it in that book. One that I've gifted more than anything else other than your books, Kinder and One More Light, is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse.
Oh, I love the animation of that.
Oh, it is absolutely
incredible.
Powerful. But one of the guys that was in our tribe with SIREN Project, he's getting ready to have his first kid. And I sent it to him just because that book's so powerful to me. So I've shared that with quite a few people that have had children because it's the modern day Winnie the Pooh. Mm-hmm. But the animation, the Apple TV animation of it is absolutely powerful. Short little blurbs that apply to any side of life. So those would be my two off the hand. Eric, Olivia's husband, just wrote a book, Stoicism for First Responders. That's pretty good as well. It's another one I gift a lot because it's inexpensive, but it hits home. So
brilliant. Yeah. All right. Well, you mentioned the Apple TV version of the Fox the Mole.
Yeah.
What about other documentaries and shows or films?
I don't watch a lot of TV, a lot of shows, just because I like to be engaged in living life. One that I watched, I think it was on National Geographic, was Limitless with Chris Hemsworth.
That was a good show, especially the one on mortality at the end.
Yes, yeah. It was very powerful, and that's like my post-retirement. I was actually intrigued by the death doula side of things because of experiences like I just shared at the hospital. To be able to be there to support the loved ones that have supported. Like I say, when my older sister died, she died at home on hospice, and my parents did the end of life care, and there was a lot of powerful to the spiritual side of things of having her perish in her own home instead of in a facility somewhere. Mm-hmm. So
I had a guy on a couple of times now, Dr. BJ Miller, who is a palliative care physician, but he's a double amputee as well. He was on top of a streetcar in San Francisco, I think it was. I got that right, Berkeley. And they were just, messing around, and it was just parked. He just climbed up the ladder, but didn't realize it was charged, and they arced off his wristwatch. So he lost an arm and a leg.
Yeah, I listened to that. That was a powerful one.
So, what they did with hospice, though, in that little hospice, it was a little home, and they baked cookies, and they just, looked at it as like, well, every day still counts. Just because you're in hospice and you're, passing away, what is it that we can do to add value today? Right.
And then a lot of guys that went on the SIREN Project journey with me, we've had conversations afterwards, and their experiences on scene to witness deaths and people, that kind of stuff, is to view because of their own journey and what they went through. One of the modalities on the treat is almost like a death and a rebirth type of thing. So it's moving on to the next stage of whatever existence you have. And their witnesses of death on scene their perspectives have changed because of their own personal experience with the medicine. So,
not getting too specific, but one thing I've heard from certain people that take certain plant medicines is almost like a celestial experience where you realize that you're actually part of everything.
100%.
You had that too?
Yes. There was, like I said, there was a lot of darkness, but one of the medicines, DMT is what it is. Your body actually produces it. So it's not like it's anything out of the norm. It's already in your body, and it's you feel it most at childbirth, and those last, before you die, you have a huge DMT dump essentially. So that's when you start seeing things and understanding things. And a lot of people have those kind of experiences. So
yeah, it seemed to kind of bolster a lot of people. Again, more spirituality than religion, but realizing that, you are, I mean, every molecule and every leaf and every drop of water in the ocean, it's all one big kind of, beautiful coalition.
100%.
Brilliant. All right. Well, then you mentioned Andrea Lucy. Anyone else you'd recommend to come on this show as a guest?
Oh, there's so many of them. Have you had Jeremy Sanders, Crew First Culture?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Jeremy is very well spoken, and he's had his own personal journey and things that he's overcome. Jeremy's a cool guy. They've fostered a lot of kids. I think they've got 8 kids total and all the experiences that come with fostering children, and then his work journey and his passion for the fire service. We got connected through Tactical Resiliency Training, but Jeremy's got his own podcast, Crew First Culture Podcast, and his approach to things would mirror a lot of the things that you're into, just as far as like coaching and modalities and how everything that we learn in the fire service are tools that every human being needs, not just first responders. So
brilliant. Yeah, we need to make that happen then. All right. Well, then the last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find you, what do you do to decompress?
Oh, any number of things. My go-to here lately is one of our guys that just passed was a Harley guy, a motorcycle rider. And for his celebration of life, he wanted everybody to represent on the motorcycle side of things. So not necessarily show up in your Class A's. He was huge about that connection, brotherhood side of things. So I went up to buy a T-shirt for a celebration of life and came home with a motorcycle. So most expensive T-shirt I ever bought. My wife said, you were gone too long, and I knew what was happening when I broke the news to her. But definitely riding on a motorcycle has been one of those flow states, and it's kind of like the iron never lies. Same thing with the motorcycle. If you're not in a flow state and 100% self-aware and aware of what's going on, I can tell when it's a good day to be on a bike and not a good day to be on a bike. So just where my headspace is, nature, kayaking, hiking, rucking, doing anything outside, and spending time with my family. My wife and I have a newfound relationship since my previous retreat. And my phone, I just looked at it as we're talking. She's wishing me good luck on the podcast and telling me I'll do great. So before, my whole purpose of going on my retreat was to find myself again. And that's the thing that concerned her the most, is that I was going to go find myself and she wasn't going to be part of that anymore. And that was the whole purpose, was to return to the husband that she knew and loved and married, and not the jaded, salty firefighter that thinks he needs to save the world. And we've been able to reconnect after that. So we're actually doing a race at the end of the year that she signed up for. Her thing's been running and marathons and that kind of stuff. So we signed up for one of those kind of endless races where for every 25 minutes you go a mile and a half till you can't go any longer. So she turns 50 this year. Yes, I just told my wife's age on a podcast. But she wants to do at least 50 miles in that. So this year we're tackling that together. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, that salty element, it's fatigue.
Yes.
Like you said, all elements, emotional, physical, mental, it's just breakdown. And again, there is a good person in 95% of us. Some just came for the benefits and we all know who they are. But there is that servant's heart. And I've always said this, some of the most beautiful parents, husbands, wives are the men and women that I serve with. They're beautiful human beings. But I've got a good friend of mine, madly in love, head over heels in love with his girlfriend, and he married, and they had children. And I've watched him break down. And I think the relationship is broken down, the relationship with the children, and it's the job. It's the hours of the job. The job you can do in a healthy way, but you have to give these men and women the rest and recovery and support, and have that culture of nurturing and vulnerability, so that when you go for 24 hours, you give your all, and then when you come home, you can recover from it, and your family have you home, so you can take the baby because the husband or the wife has been up for 24 hours, whatever the thing is. And it's so, again, it's heartbreaking to see the way it is, but it's so encouraging to see that we can fix this. Mm-hmm. Because, I'll give you a perfect example. One of the, Joshua Chase read Kinder, and he stopped, I think it was like chapter 4, and he was like, dude, that's me right now.
Oh, I had the same experience.
And he went and got counseling,
yeah.
And he messaged me and said, my relationship with my wife is much better, and we're doing this and this. Right. And so it's just a case of realizing that that's not you. Yeah, it's how you are.
The road rage in there, that's the one that stabbed me in the gut.
Mm-hmm. And that's straight from my fucking heart, mate.
Yeah.
You can probably tell.
Yeah, definitely. I felt that.
Yeah. So, but again, I would argue I'm a kind person.
Right. Oh, 100%.
So I don't want to run around being angry. But how do you offset that with, you've literally just gone to a wreck where the person who caused it driving like an asshole is now crying on the curb, feeling sorry for themselves, and you're cutting the 3 dead people out of the minivan. It's hard to offset that when then the next morning you see someone driving like an asshole and you want to drag them out the car and beat them an inch of their life because you know what's going to happen if they keep doing that thing.
Right.
So, it is a hard balance, but the way that you offset that is, again, the healthy work week, the communication, the removing stigma even from the modalities that you found really successful recently, and allowing our men and women to give for 24 hours and then heal for 72. It's that simple.
100. Yeah.
All right. Well, for people listening, where are the best places to reach out to you, learn more, and anywhere else you want to kind of direct them?
I don't have any social media accounts other than LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. My cell phone is always on, 678-614-9254. Call, text. I'm always available to talk. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. Once again, I know my boundaries, so if I don't have a minute, I may tell you, hey, I'll get back to you tomorrow, but that's nothing against you. That's all on me. Other than that, I teach with Tactical Resiliency Training. We'll be at MAFC teaching our Firefighter Resiliency class. We'll also be at Firemanship in Aurora, Illinois. Phenomenal conference, Cody Test Drill. He'd be another great one to have on your podcast. And then, like I say, I work with Yoga for First Responders, who's a 501c3 that, due to a lot of the budget cuts and the political nature, is struggling to fill classes and be funded just due to everything else, even though it's such a valuable tool. So I'm just going to throw a plug out there for Yoga for First Responders. And if you're looking at donating money or have extra money to donate, that's a very valuable place because, once again, it's a upstream savior is what it is. Instead of pulling people out of the river, it's better to go upstream and find where they're falling in. So it's an upstream fix. Also SIREN Project. They're also, through the love and the caring and everything that Tim and Angela do, they can use some funding as well, because SIREN Project, you cover your travel, they cover the rest of the cost of the retreat. So get a couple plugs in there for those nonprofit agencies that can use all kinds of financial support to provide the resources and tools that are needed.
Well, I've got the show of Kinder in the works. And when I say in the works, like step 1,
right?
Baby toe, through the door. It's not like I've got studios and funding and all that stuff, but I have a plan where there's going to be a parallel thing that is actually going to bring light to all these tools. And I hope that I can include, basically a lot of the ones that you talked about in one of these platforms, so that people will realize there are tools available. I can start my own personal rabbit hole of healing today. and empower every single person, and then give them a platform where they can get all these resources, and hopefully then they'll be front and center, not struggling and trying to scrape together funds, but they'll be the go-to ones. So yeah, that's coming. Come hell or high water, it's going to happen.
I believe in it. You don't put your mind to anything and not accomplish it. You've done some amazing things. I thank you for being the voice.
Well, I want to thank you, mate. I mean, honestly, like this, I would have, 2 episodes if it was just me yapping. It'd be the intro to the podcast 8.5 years ago. And then I would be an empty episode because I wouldn't have learned anything. So I wouldn't be able to do the 24/72 one. But every other one, almost 1,100, is people like you. People that have come on, that have been courageously vulnerable, that have shared their story, shared their experience, and given hope to everyone else that's listening. So I want to thank you for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thanks. I'm deeply humbled and deeply honored. Thank you, James.